The roadside choice. When Elias Crow pulled his wagon to a halt on that dust-choked Wyoming road in the brutal summer of 1882, he broke his own cardinal rule: never stop for strangers. The small girl crouched beside the trail wasn't just crying. She was fading, her lips cracked from thirst, her dress stained with something that looked like dried blood. "Where's your family?" he asked, his voice rough from disuse. Her silence hit him harder than any scream could have. In that moment, neither of them knew this roadside encounter would shatter the carefully constructed walls around a broken man's heart, or that the choice he was about to make would cost him everything he thought he wanted: his solitude, his safety, and his carefully maintained distance from a world that had already taken too much. But some choices don't ask permission. They demand action. Before we continue this journey together, I invite you to stay with us until the very end to discover how one moment of compassion can transform two broken lives. If this story moves you, please hit that like button and comment with your city below. I'd love to see how far this tale of unexpected family travels across the world. The summer of 1882 had turned Wyoming into a furnace, the kind of relentless heat that made even the hardest men question their choices. Elias Crow had stopped questioning anything years ago. At 43, his face bore the deep lines of a man who'd learned that hope was a luxury he couldn't afford, etched there by wind, sun, and the particular kind of grief that never quite heals. His wagon creaked along the rutted trail between Sweetwater Station and his ranch 15 miles north, the late afternoon sun beating down on his shoulders through his faded work shirt. The landscape stretched endlessly in all directions: sage and scrub grass, distant buttes shimmering in the heat, the vast emptiness that had become his preferred companion. He'd made this trip 100 times, maybe more, always alone, always silent except for the rhythmic clop of his horse's hooves and the protest of wagon wheels against stone. He almost didn't see her. The girl was small enough that she blended into the roadside brush, her dress the same dusty brown as everything else. But some instinct he thought he'd buried 6 years ago with his wife and infant son, made him pull back on the reins. Whoa! The horse stopped, grateful for the rest. Elias sat motionless for a long moment, studying the small form huddled beside a scraggly juniper. She wasn't moving. For a terrible second, he thought she might already be gone, just another casualty of this brutal land that took and never gave anything back. Then he saw her shoulders hitch with a sob. Every practical bone in his body told him to keep moving. Strangers meant complications, and complications meant pain. He'd built his life around avoiding both. His ranch was isolated for a reason. He went to town only when necessary, spoke only when required, and he sure as hell didn't stop for crying children on empty roads. But his hands were already wrapping the reins around the brake handle. He climbed down slowly, his boots hitting the packed earth with soft thuds. The girl's head came up at the sound, and Elias felt something twist in his chest at the sight of her face. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8, all enormous dark eyes and a too-thin face, her skin burned red by the sun, her lips cracked and bleeding. "Easy now," he said, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. He'd spoken to his horse more in the past year than to any human being. "I'm not going to hurt you." She didn't run. That worried him more than if she had. A child alone on this road should be terrified of a strange man approaching. Her stillness spoke of exhaustion beyond fear, or worse, resignation that whatever happened next couldn't be worse than what had already occurred. He stopped a few feet away, crouching down so he wouldn't loom over her. Up close, he could see the tear tracks through the dust on her cheeks, the way her small hands clutched a rag doll with most of its stuffing gone. Her dress, once probably a cheerful yellow, was torn at the shoulder and stained dark across the front. Not blood, he realized with relief. Something else. Sickness, maybe. "Where's your folks?" he asked quietly. The girl's chin trembled. "Gone." The single word hit him like a physical blow. He'd heard that tone before, knew the specific weight it carried. This wasn't a child who'd wandered away from a campsite. This was a child who understood that gone meant forever. Gone where? He kept his voice gentle, the way he used to talk to his son during thunderstorms. "Mama got sick." The words came out in a whisper. 3 days ago, maybe 4. I don't remember anymore. Papa said we had to keep moving, Had to get to Fort Bridger where Mama's sister lives. But this morning, her voice broke. This morning, Papa wouldn't wake up. Elias felt ice slide down his spine despite the oppressive heat. Where's your wagon? She pointed down the road toward a cluster of rocks about a quarter-mile distant. Papa pulled off there last night, said we needed to rest. He stood slowly, every instinct screaming at him to ride away, to not get involved, to protect the careful numbness he'd cultivated like a crop. But he was already moving toward his wagon, already reaching for his canteen. What's your name? He asked, unscrewing the cap. Lucy Harper. I'm Elias Crow. You drink this slow, you hear? Not too fast or you'll be sick. He handed her the canteen and watched as she obeyed, taking small, careful sips. The way she controlled herself, despite obvious desperation, told him someone had raised this child well, had taught her discipline even in extremity. That made what had happened to her family even more cruel. When she'd had enough, he took back the canteen and studied the angle of the sun. Maybe 2 hours of good light left. Less if he factored in the time it would take to do what needed doing. Lucy, I need you to show me where your wagon is. Can you do that? She nodded and stood on trembling legs. He caught her elbow when she swayed, steadying her until she found her balance. Then she walked ahead of him with the careful deliberation of someone conserving every ounce of strength. The wagon came into view as they rounded the rocks, a small covered affair, the kind of modest rig a family of limited means might use for a long journey. The canvas top was sun-bleached and patched in several places. One wheel sat at an odd angle, the axle cracked. Elias's trained eye cataloged the damage, the supplies scattered in the wagon bed, the complete absence of horses. Stolen or run off, most likely. His gaze moved to the bedroll laid out in the wagon's shadow and the still form lying atop it. You wait here, he told Lucy quietly. He approached the body alone. The man had been perhaps 35, thin as a rail, his face gaunt even in death. Fever had taken him, Elias guessed, the same illness that had claimed his wife. He'd seen it before. Families struck down on the trail, too far from help, too stubborn, or desperate to turn back. The frontier swallowed them whole and rarely bothered to spit out the bones. He found the woman's grave on the other side of the wagon, a shallow depression marked with rocks and a crude wooden cross. The man had managed that much before the fever took him too. Elias stood looking down at it for a long moment, remembering another grave, another cross, another day when the world had revealed its essential cruelty. The sensible thing would be to ride into Sweetwater, report what he'd found, let the town deal with it. They'd bury the father, send the girl to an orphanage, or find some distant relative. It wasn't his problem. He'd done his part just by stopping. He turned and looked at Lucy, still standing where he'd left her, clutching that ragged doll, her face carefully blank in the way children learn when showing emotion becomes too dangerous. The sensible thing. Lucy, he called. Come here. She walked to him with those same careful steps. He gestured to a flat stone. Sit down. I've got work to do before dark. He spent the next hour digging. The ground was hard, reluctant to yield to his shovel, each scoop an effort that left him sweat-soaked and breathing hard. Lucy sat on her stone and watched in silence, never crying, never speaking. That worried him more than tears would have. When the grave was deep enough, he wrapped Lucy's father in his own bedroll, all the dignity Elias could offer, and lowered him down with rope. He filled the hole methodically, then piled rocks over it the way the man had done for his wife. When he finished, the sun was touching the horizon, painting the sky in shades of copper and blood. You want to say anything? He asked Lucy. She stood and walked to the grave. For a long moment, she just stared down at the stones. Then, in a voice so soft he barely heard it, she said, I'll be good, Papa. I promise I'll be good. Elias felt something crack in the region of his chest where his heart used to live. He gathered what useful supplies remained in the wagon, some canned goods, a few pieces of clothing, a small leather-bound book that looked like a Bible, and loaded them into his own rig. Then he lifted Lucy up onto the wagon seat. She weighed almost nothing, all sharp angles and fragile bones. Where are we going? She asked as he climbed up beside her. For a moment he didn't answer. He could still turn back, still ride for Sweetwater, still do the sensible thing. My place, he heard himself say. For tonight, anyway. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow. The ride home took nearly 2 hours in the gathering dark. Lucy sat beside him in silence, that doll clutched against her chest, her small body swaying with the wagon's movement. Once, when they hit a particularly rough patch, she started to tip sideways and Elias caught her automatically, steadying her with one hand while keeping the reins in the other. "Thank you," she whispered. He grunted, released her, kept his eyes on the road. The ranch appeared as full dark fell, the small house nothing more than a darker shape against the star-filled sky. Elias had never bothered with lamps when he came home late, knew every inch of the property by feel. But tonight, he found himself wishing he'd left something burning, some small light of welcome. He helped Lucy down and led her inside, fumbling for matches in the dark. When he got the lamp lit, yellow light spilled across the single room that served as kitchen, sitting area, and his sleeping space. Another door led to what had been meant as a bedroom, but he'd kept it closed for 6 years, unable to face the empty cradle and the small clothes his wife had sewn. Lucy stood in the middle of the room, taking in the spare furnishings, rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, an iron stove, shelves with minimal provisions. A man's space, lived in, but not loved. "You hungry?" he asked. She nodded. He built up the fire in the stove and heated beans with salt pork, sliced bread that was only a day old. She ate slowly, methodically, cleaning her plate without comment. When she finished, she folded her hands in her lap and waited. "When's the last time you slept?" he asked. "I don't know. Before Mama died, I think." 4 days, then. Maybe 5. No wonder she looked like a ghost. He stood abruptly and walked to the closed door. His hand hesitated on the handle. He hadn't opened it in 6 years, hadn't been able to face what lay beyond. All those hopes turned to dust, all those dreams he'd buried along with his wife and child. But Lucy needed a bed. That was simple fact. The rest was just cowardice. He opened the door. The room was exactly as he'd left it. Dust lay thick on every surface. Cobwebs draped the corners. But the small bed was still there, the cradle beside it, the trunk of baby clothes. He'd meant this to be a nursery. His wife had died making sure it could be. "This was going to be my son's room," he said quietly. But he died, along with his mother, long time ago now. Lucy stepped into the doorway, her eyes taking in the space. "I'm sorry." Such simple words, but the way she said them, with the understanding of someone who knew exactly what loss meant, made them weigh more than any elaborate condolence. "Bed needs fresh linens," Elias said gruffly, "and we'll need to air it out, but it'll do for tonight." He found sheets in a trunk, shook them out, made up the small bed with hands that remembered this task from another lifetime. Lucy watched, still clutching her doll. "You got anything else to wear?" he asked. "That dress needs washing." She shook her head. He rummaged through the trunk and found a shirt his wife had made for their son, meant to be grown into, sized for a child of perhaps 8 or 9. It would work as a nightdress for Lucy. "Here, you can wear this while I wash your things." She took the shirt carefully, as if it might break. "It was his?" "Yeah. Is it all right to wear something that belonged to someone who died?" The question caught him off guard. Most children wouldn't think to ask, wouldn't understand the weight such objects could carry. "I think," he said slowly, "that my son would be glad to know it was being used. Better that than sitting in a trunk collecting dust." Lucy nodded and began unbuttoning her dress with matter-of-fact efficiency. Elias turned away quickly, giving her privacy, and busied himself pumping water into a basin. When he turned back, she was wearing the shirt, which hung nearly to her ankles. Her dress lay folded neatly on the trunk. He took it, trying not to notice the stains, the tears, the evidence of everything this child had endured. "I'll wash this tonight. It'll be dry by morning." "You don't have to," Lucy said quietly. "I can wash it." "You need to sleep." "But you've already done so much. Papa always said we shouldn't be a burden." Elias crouched down so he was eye level with her. "Lucy, you listen to me. You're not a burden. You understand? You're a child who's had more bad luck than anyone should have to bear. And for tonight at least, you're my responsibility. That means I take care of things. You just sleep." Her eyes filled with tears, the first he'd seen all evening. "What's going to happen to me?" It was the question he'd been avoiding, the question he didn't have a good answer for. "I don't know yet," he admitted. "But we'll figure it out. I promise you that. Nothing's going to happen tonight, so for now, you just rest. You're safe here." She nodded, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. He guided her to the bed, pulled back the covers. She climbed in and lay down, her body barely making a dent in the mattress. "Mr. Crow?" Her voice was very small. "Yeah? Would you leave the door open? I don't like the dark." "I'll leave it open, and I'll keep the lamp burning in the other room." "Thank you." He started to leave, then paused in the doorway. "Lucy, you did real good today. Your parents would be proud of how strong you've been." He didn't wait for her response, just pulled the door partway closed and returned to the main room. He washed her dress in the basin, scrubbing at the stains with harsh soap, then hung it near the stove to dry. Then he sat at the table, poured himself a whiskey he rarely touched, and tried to think. The sensible thing was still to take her to town tomorrow. Let the authorities handle it. He wasn't equipped to care for a child. He lived alone for a reason. He'd built this life specifically to avoid connection, to avoid caring, to avoid the possibility of loss. But every time he thought about Lucy's face, that careful blankness, that exhausted resignation, he felt something shift in his chest. She reminded him of himself after his wife and son died. That same look of someone who'd learned not to expect anything good, not to hope, not to trust that safety could last. He'd been 37 then. He'd had choices. Lucy was 8 years old and had nothing. No family, no resources, no reason to believe the world held anything but cruelty. The whiskey burned going down. He poured another. Through the partially open door, he could hear Lucy's breathing even out, shifting into the deeper rhythms of sleep. He stood and moved quietly to check on her. She'd curled into a tight ball, that ragged doll tucked under her chin, her face finally relaxed. Something about the sight of her there, in the bed meant for his son, wearing the shirt sewn by his wife's hands, made the decision for him. He wasn't going to take her to town tomorrow. He didn't know what he was going to do exactly, didn't have a plan, but he knew with sudden, absolute certainty that he wasn't going to hand this child over to strangers, wasn't going to consign her to an orphanage or some distant relative who might not want her. She'd asked if she was a burden. The question had cut him because he recognized it, the same question he'd asked himself after his family died. Am I too much? Am I too broken? Should I just disappear? No one had been there to tell him no, to tell him he mattered, to tell him that his grief and his pain and his damaged heart were worth carrying forward. But he could be that person for Lucy. The realization should have terrified him. Instead, it settled over him like an old coat, familiar, comfortable, right. He'd spent 6 years in careful isolation, convinced he was better off alone, convinced connection meant inevitable loss. But maybe, he thought, standing in that doorway watching a sleeping child, maybe the real loss was in never trying. Maybe spending the rest of his life in self-imposed exile wasn't honor for the dead. It was just another kind of dying. He returned to the main room and sat at the table, the whiskey forgotten. Through the window, stars blazed across the Wyoming sky, indifferent and eternal. Somewhere out there, Lucy's parents lay in fresh graves. Their journey ended. But Lucy's continued. And for reasons he couldn't fully articulate, Elias knew his journey had just begun again too. The lamp burned low as he sat thinking, planning. There would be practical matters to address, legal questions probably. People in town would talk. A single man taking in an orphan girl would raise eyebrows, invite suspicion. He'd need to make things official somehow, make sure she was protected not just by his word, but by law. But those were problems for tomorrow. Tonight, he'd done what needed doing. He'd stopped when every instinct told him to keep moving. He'd offered shelter when isolation would have been easier. He'd chosen, however uncertainly, to step back into the current of life. The last time he'd made a choice like this, to marry, to hope, to imagine a future, it had destroyed him. But he was still here. Scarred, yes. Damaged, certainly. But still breathing, still capable of feeling that crack in his chest when Lucy asked if she was a burden. Still capable, it seemed, of caring. He stood finally and checked the fire, banked it for the night. Lucy's dress was nearly dry. He'd have it ready for her in the morning. Then he'd make breakfast, something more substantial than beans. A child needed proper food, needed routine, needed stability. He could provide those things. He had a home, land, means. What he didn't have was experience with children, or patience, or any kind of softness left after years of deliberate hardening. But he could learn. He'd learn to survive alone. He could learn to live with company. The thought almost made him smile. Almost, but not quite. 6 years of solitude had etched itself deep. Change wouldn't come easy or quick. But watching Lucy sleep in that small bed, her breathing peaceful for perhaps the first time in days, he felt something he'd thought long dead. Not hope, exactly. Hope was still too dangerous. But possibility. The sense that tomorrow might be different from yesterday, that the pattern could break, that the walls he'd built to keep pain out might also have been keeping life at bay. He moved to his own bedroll spread out near the stove and lay down without bothering to undress. Sleep felt impossible, his mind too full of questions, of what-ifs, of the magnitude of the decision he'd just made. But exhaustion claimed him anyway, pulling him under into dreamless dark. He woke before dawn, the way he always did, his body attuned to ranch rhythms. For a moment, he lay still, orienting himself. Then memory returned, the girl by the roadside, the graves, the choice. He rose quietly and checked the bedroom. Lucy still slept, barely visible in the pre-dawn gray. He left her undisturbed and went outside to handle morning chores, feeding the chickens, checking on the 2 cows, mucking the small stable. Physical work helped him think. The sun was just breaking the horizon when he heard the door open behind him. Lucy stood on the threshold, still wearing his son's shirt, her hair a tangled mess around her face. "Morning," he said, keeping his voice neutral. "Good morning, Mr. Crow." She stepped out onto the porch, bare feet silent on the worn boards. "What can I help with?" He studied her for a moment. Most children, given the chance to sleep after such an ordeal, would stay in bed as long as possible. But here she was, offering help before he'd even made breakfast. "You ever gather eggs?" he asked. She nodded. "Mama taught me." "Baskets by the coop. Careful of the red hen, she's mean." Lucy walked across the yard with determined steps, located the basket, and approached the chicken coop with the confidence of someone who knew her way around a farm. Elias watched her work, noting the efficient way she moved, the care she took not to startle the birds. Her parents had raised her well. Whatever else had happened, they'd given her skills, discipline, a foundation. That would matter in the days ahead. When she returned with the basket full, he nodded approval. "Good. Now, let's get you some proper food." He made breakfast, eggs, bacon, biscuits with honey. Simple fare, but more than he usually bothered with for himself. Lucy ate with the same careful controls the night before, never rushing, never taking more than offered. "Lucy," he said when they'd finished, "we need to talk about what happens next." Her hand stilled on her lap. "You're taking me to town." It wasn't a question. She'd already assumed, already prepared herself for abandonment. That look of resignation was back, the walls going up. "No," he said. "I'm not." Her eyes widened. "You're not?" "I'm thinking you stay here, with me, if that's what you want." She stared at him, mouth slightly open, clearly trying to process words that didn't match her expectations. "But you don't know me. Don't know. I'm not your kin. Why would you cheat? Why wouldn't I?" He kept his voice level, matter of fact. "I've got room. I could use help around the place. And you need somewhere to be. Seems like simple sense to me." "People will talk," she said quietly. "Papa told me once that people always talk when things aren't normal." "Let them talk. I don't get to town much anyway." "But what about the law? Don't you have to make it proper?" Smart child, he thought, understanding the complications even at her age. "I'll ride into Sweetwater this morning," he said. "Talk to the sheriff. See what needs doing to make it legal. But Lucy, I need you to understand something. This isn't charity. This isn't me doing you a favor. If you stay, you pull your weight. You do chores, you mind what I tell you, you don't cause trouble. I'm not good with children. I don't know the first thing about raising a girl. I'll probably do a lot of things wrong. But you'll try." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Yeah, I'll try." She was quiet for a long moment, her gaze dropping to her folded hands. When she looked up again, her eyes were bright with tears that didn't fall. "I'll be good," she said. "I'll work hard. I won't be trouble. I promise." "I know you will." He stood, suddenly uncomfortable with the emotion in the room. "Now, your dress should be dry. Get changed. I'll hitch up the wagon." The ride to Sweetwater took most of the morning. Lucy sat beside him wearing her clean dress, her hair brushed and braided. work she'd done herself while he prepared the wagon. She didn't speak much, but she watched everything: the landscape, the occasional rider they passed, the gradual appearance of buildings as they approached town. Sweetwater wasn't much. A main street of perhaps a dozen buildings, a general store, a saloon, a church, the sheriff's office. Elias pulled up in front of the latter and set the brake. "You wait here," he told Lucy. "Yes, sir." Inside, Sheriff Tom Brennan looked up from his desk with surprise. "Elias Crow. Hell, I haven't seen you in, 3 months?" "About that." Elias removed his hat, turned it in his hands. "I need some advice, Tom. Legal kind." Brennan's eyebrows rose. "You in trouble?" "Not exactly." Elias laid out the situation in sparse detail, finding Lucy, her parents' deaths, his decision to keep her. When he finished, the sheriff sat back in his chair, whistling low. "That's a hell of a situation, Elias. You sure about this? Taking in a child is no small thing." "I'm sure." "Folks will talk. Single man, young girl. You know how people think." "I know. Don't care." Brennan studied him for a long moment. "You've changed your tune from the man who told me 6 years ago he wanted to be left alone to die in peace." "Maybe I have." The sheriff stood and moved to a filing cabinet, pulling out papers. "Well, if you're set on this, we'll need to do it proper. Adoption papers, most likely. But first we'll need to establish that the child has no other living relatives. You said they were heading to Fort Bridger?" Girl mentioned her mother's sister. "We'll need to send word, see if anyone claims her. If not, and if you still want to proceed, we can file for formal adoption. Take maybe 2-3 months to process. In the meantime, you'll be her legal guardian. I'll draw up temporary papers today." "How much will all this cost?" "Filing fees, maybe $20, plus whatever the lawyer charges for drawing up the adoption papers." "But Elias," Brennan leaned forward, "you sure this isn't just you feeling guilty? Because guilt's a poor foundation for taking on a child." Elias met his gaze steadily. "It's not guilt, Tom. It's choice." The sheriff nodded slowly. "All right then. Give me an hour to get the paperwork together. You might want to take the girl to the general store, get her some proper clothes. What she's wearing looks like it's been through hell." Elias found Lucy exactly where he'd left her, sitting straight-backed in the wagon, her hands folded in her lap. "Come on," he said. "We need to get you some things." Martha Brennan, the sheriff's wife and proprietor of the general store, nearly dropped her measuring tape when Elias walked in with Lucy. "Elias Crow, as I live and breathe," she said. "And who's this?" "Lucy Harper. She's staying with me. Needs clothes, shoes, whatever else girls require." Martha's eyes went wide, questions clearly multiplying, but she was savvy enough to ask them later. "Well, let's see what we can do. Come here, child." Elias retreated to a corner while Martha fussed over Lucy, pulling out dresses, stockings, a warm coat for when winter came. Lucy accepted it all with quiet grace, never asking for anything, never complaining. "She's a sweet thing," Martha said quietly when Lucy was trying on shoes. "What happened to her folks?" "Fever. Both gone." "And you're taking her in?" "I am." Martha was quiet for a moment, then, "That's good of you, Elias. Real good. Don't know if anyone said it, but that little girl's lucky you found her." "Or I'm lucky," he said, surprising himself. When they left the store an hour later, Lucy wore a new dress, simple blue cotton, new shoes, and carried a bundle containing 3 more dresses, undergarments, a nightgown, and a warm coat. Elias had also purchased fabric and thread, needles, buttons, things Martha insisted every household with a girl required. "Thank you," Lucy said as he helped her into the wagon. "I'll take care of everything. I'll make it last." "I know you will." They collected the guardianship papers from Sheriff Brennan, temporary documents but legal enough for now, and started the long ride home. The sun was past its peak, beginning its slow descent toward the western horizon. Lucy sat beside him, one hand resting on her bundle of new clothes, her expression thoughtful. "Mr. Crow," she said after they'd traveled several miles in silence. "Yeah? Why did you stop?" "Yesterday, on the road. Most folks would have kept going." It was a fair question, one he'd been asking himself. "Don't rightly know," he admitted. "Something just made me." Do you believe in angels? Mama used to say that sometimes angels made people do things they wouldn't normally do. I don't know about angels, but I know that sometimes, maybe, people get second chances, even when they don't deserve them. Lucy was quiet, digesting this. Then, is that what I am? Your second chance? Maybe. Or maybe you're the one getting the second chance, and I'm just along for the ride. She smiled then. A small, hesitant thing, but genuine. It transformed her face, made her look less like a tiny adult and more like the child she should be. Either way, she said softly, I'm glad you stopped. Yeah, Elias said, surprising himself again. Me too. The ranch came into view as the sun touched the horizon, the small house painted gold by the dying light. Elias had never thought of it as home, just a place he existed. But looking at it now, with Lucy beside him, he saw it differently. Saw possibility in the small bedroom that would no longer sit empty. Saw purpose in the daily routines that had become mere habit. Saw maybe the beginning of something that could be called a life. He pulled the wagon to a stop and helped Lucy down. She stood looking at the house, her bundle clutched against her chest. What happens now? She asked. Now, Elias said, we figure out how to live together, day by day. No promises except we'll both do our best. Lucy nodded, that careful seriousness back in her expression. I can do that. Then let's start with supper. You know how to cook? Mama was teaching me. I'm not very good yet. Well, neither am I. So we'll figure it out together. They walked towards the house side by side, man and child, two lives intersecting by chance or fate, or whatever force had made Elias stop on that dusty road. Behind them, the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of fire and promise. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The letter to Fort Bridger. The wait to see if anyone claimed Lucy. The long process of making temporary guardianship into permanent adoption. The daily work of learning to live with another person, to care, to risk connection. But tonight, there was just supper to make, chores to finish, a routine to establish. Small things. Ordinary things. The kind of things that built a life one day at a time. Elias pushed open the door and gestured Lucy inside. She stepped across the threshold, and something in her posture eased, as if she'd been waiting to see if this offer was real, if this place might truly be hers. Your room's as you left it, he said. Go put your things away. I'll start supper. She disappeared into the bedroom while he built up the fire in the stove. Through the open door he could hear her moving around, the soft sounds of someone settling in. It was strange, having another presence in the house. Strange, but not unwelcome. When she emerged, she'd changed into one of her new dresses and tied her hair back with a ribbon Martha had included. She looked more like a regular child now, less like someone being hunted by grief. Can I help? She asked. You can set the table. They worked together in comfortable silence, the easy rhythm of shared task. It wasn't perfect. They got in each other's way twice, and Elias realized he had no idea how much food a growing child needed. But it worked. That was enough. Over simple stew and bread, Lucy asked questions about the ranch, the animals, what chores needed doing. Elias answered each one, found himself volunteering information he normally kept locked away. The land had been his grandfather's, originally. He'd inherited it after his wife died. It wasn't much, 160 acres, barely profitable, but it was his. Will you teach me? Lucy asked. How to run a ranch. You planning on taking over someday? Maybe. Or maybe I just want to know things. Mama said knowledge was the one thing nobody could take from you. Your mama was smart. She was. Lucy's voice went quiet. She would have liked you, I think. She always said the best people were the ones who helped without asking for anything back. Elias felt that crack in his chest again, that uncomfortable pressure where feeling leaked through carefully maintained walls. Well, he said gruffly, I expect plenty back. Work, mainly. And I'll need you to learn to cook better than me because my biscuits could double as ammunition. Lucy smiled, that same small, genuine expression. I'll try. After supper, she insisted on washing dishes. Elias let her, watched as she stood on a wooden crate to reach the basin, her movements efficient and practiced. Someone had taught her to pull her weight, to contribute, to find worth in work well done. As darkness fell complete, he showed her how to bank the fire, how to check the locks, the small rituals of securing a home for the night. She absorbed it all with solemn attention, committing each detail to memory. "Mr. Crow?" she said as they finished. "What should I call you?" The question caught him off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean, Mr. Crow feels formal, like you're a stranger, but you're not. Not anymore. So what should I call you?" He'd avoided thinking about this, about what exactly their relationship would be. He wasn't her father, could never replace the man who lay buried on the trail. But he wasn't just a stranger either, or a guardian, or any simple category. "What feels right to you?" he asked. She considered this seriously. Could I call you Elias?" "That'd be fine." "Just Elias?" He understood what she was really asking. Was he willing to be more than a name, more than a provider of shelter? Was he willing to be someone who mattered? "Or," he said slowly, "you could call me Pa, if that feels right. No pressure. But if you want to, I wouldn't mind." Her eyes went wide. "Really? Really? But I already had a PA. It feels like I'd be forgetting him." Elias crouched down, meeting her gaze. "You won't forget him, Lucy. He'll always be your father, always. But he's gone, and you're still here, still living. And living means moving forward, even when it feels wrong. Your pa would want you to have someone, would want you to be cared for. Calling me Pa doesn't erase him. It just means you're choosing to keep going." A tear rolled down her cheek. "He told me to be good, to find someone kind. Do you think he'd be okay with this? With you?" "I think," Elias said quietly, "that any father would be grateful to know his daughter found safety, found a home, found someone who'll do his best by her." Lucy nodded, wiping at her eyes. "Then I'll call you Pa, if that's all right." "It's all right." She threw her arms around his neck suddenly, hugging him with fierce intensity. Elias froze for a moment, caught off guard, then slowly brought his arms up to return the embrace. She was so small, so fragile. The responsibility of her felt enormous, but so did the privilege. "All right," he said softly, patting her back awkwardly. "You need to get to bed. Tomorrow's Sunday. We'll rest. But come Monday. We start your education in ranch work." "Yes, Pa." The word hit him harder than expected. He hadn't been Pa to anyone. His son had died before learning to speak. And now here was this child, choosing to give him that title, that role, that responsibility. He tucked her into bed, pulled the covers up to her chin. "You need anything? I'm right outside. Don't be afraid to call." "I won't be afraid," she said. "Not anymore." He left the door open and the lamp burning, returned to the main room, but instead of preparing for sleep, he sat at the table, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee he'd forgotten to drink. 2 days ago, his life had been simple, predictable, safe in its isolation. Now a child slept in the next room, called him Pa, looked at him with trust he wasn't sure he deserved. The enormity of it should have terrified him. And part of him was terrified, of failing her, of proving unequal to the task, of losing her the way he'd lost everyone else. But underneath the fear ran something else, something he'd thought dead and buried with his wife and son. Purpose, connection, the fragile, dangerous beginning of caring about tomorrow. He'd stopped on that road against all instinct and logic. He'd chosen to help when every self-protective bone in his body screamed to keep moving. And now he was bound to this child, responsible for her present and her future, accountable for keeping her safe in a world that had already shown its cruelty. But he'd made the choice. And Elias Crow, for all his faults, for all his damage, was a man who honored his choices. He'd promised Lucy a home, he'd given his word, and he would keep it, whatever came. The lamp burned low as he sat thinking, planning. There was much to do, much to learn. But for the first time in 6 years, the future held something other than empty days and lonely nights. It held possibility. And that, he thought, was worth the risk. The letter arrived from Fort Bridger 6 weeks later, delivered by a circuit rider who stopped at the ranch on his way through. Elias signed for it with hands that wanted to shake, then waited until the rider had disappeared over the eastern ridge before breaking the seal. Lucy was in the garden pulling weeds from the vegetable patch they'd planted together. Through the window, he could see her working steadily. Her movements practiced now, her face no longer showing that haunted exhaustion. She'd put on weight in the weeks since coming to the ranch, her cheeks filling out, color returning to her skin. She looked like a child should look. Healthy, occupied, safe. He unfolded the letter, his eyes scanning the careful script. It was from Martha Dennison, Lucy's maternal aunt. The words were formal at first, expressing shock and grief at her sister's death. Then they shifted, became practical in a way that made Elias's jaw tighten. "I regret that I am unable to provide a home for my niece," she wrote. "My husband and I have 8 children of our own, and our circumstances are such that we cannot take on another mouth to feed. If the child has found suitable placement, I am grateful for the mercy shown to her. I release any claim to guardianship and wish her well in her new life." Elias read the letter twice, then a third time, making sure he understood. Lucy's only living relative didn't want her. The aunt had dressed it up in practical language, made it sound reasonable, but the message was clear. Lucy was inconvenient, unwanted, someone else's problem now. Part of him felt anger rising, hot and sharp, at the casual way this woman dismissed her own blood. But a larger part felt something else entirely. Relief. Dark, selfish relief that no one would come to claim Lucy, that the temporary arrangement could become permanent, that the fragile routine they'd built wouldn't be shattered. He folded the letter carefully and tucked it into his pocket. Lucy needed to know, but he'd tell her gently, in his own time. For now, he had other news to share. He walked outside, letting the screen door bang behind him. Lucy looked up from her weeding, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun. "Pa? Everything all right?" The words still caught him off guard sometimes, still made something warm and uncomfortable settle in his chest. "Yeah, need to talk to you, though. Come sit." She wiped her hands on her apron, one Martha Brennan had made for her, sized for a child, and followed him to the porch. They sat on the steps, the same way they'd done most evenings lately, watching the sun move across the sky while they talked about the day's work. "That letter was from Fort Bridger," he said without preamble. "From your mother's sister." Lucy went very still beside him. "What did she say?" "She said she can't take you in. Too many children already, but she's glad you found a place here, and she's not going to fight for custody." He watched Lucy's face carefully, trying to read her reaction. Her expression remained neutral, that careful blankness she'd shown when he first found her. But her hands, folded in her lap, gripped each other tightly enough that her knuckles showed white. "So I can stay?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "If you want to. Which brings me to the other thing I need to discuss with you." He pulled out the second set of papers he'd collected from town yesterday, the formal adoption documents Sheriff Brennan had helped him file. "These are adoption papers, Lucy. Legal papers that would make you my daughter in the eyes of the law. Not just a ward or a foster child. My actual daughter." She stared at the documents as if they might bite her. "Forever?" "Forever." "But what if you change your mind? What if I do something wrong, or you decide it's too much trouble, or—" "Lucy." He kept his voice firm but gentle. "Look at me." She raised her eyes to his, and he saw fear there, raw and honest. The fear of someone who'd already lost everything once and couldn't bear the thought of losing it again. "I'm not going to change my mind," he said. "These past 6 weeks you've worked harder than most grown men I know. You've learned everything I've taught you. You've never complained, never caused trouble. You keep your word and pull your weight, but more than that—" He paused, searching for words. "You've made this place feel like a home again, and I'm not going to let that go. Not ever. What if I get sick? What if something happens and I can't work? Then I'll take care of you, same as any father would. Lucy, this isn't about what you can do for me. It's about what we can be together, a family, a real one." A tear rolled down her cheek, then another. "I want that. I want it so much it scares me." "Yeah," Elias said quietly. "Me too." She wiped at her face with both hands, trying to compose herself. "What do I have to do?" "Just sign here." He pointed to a line on the document. "Sheriff Brennan will witness it when we go to town next week. Then we file it with the territorial court, and in about 8 weeks, it'll be official. You'll be Lucy Crow." She looked at the name written on the form, her new name, and something in her expression shifted. Not sadness, exactly, but a kind of bittersweet recognition. I'll still remember them. Mama and Papa Harper. I'll never forget. I know you won't, and I'd never ask you to. They gave you life, raised you, loved you. That doesn't go away just because you take a new name. You carry them with you, always. Lucy nodded slowly, then reached for the pen he offered. Her signature was careful, practiced. Someone had taught her proper penmanship. When she finished, she set down the pen and looked at him with eyes that held more trust than he deserved. Thank you, Pa, for choosing me. We chose each other, he corrected. Don't forget that. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching clouds drift across the vast Wyoming sky. Finally, Lucy spoke again, her voice thoughtful. Can I ask you something? Always. What happened to your wife and your son? You don't have to tell me if you don't want to, but I'd like to know if that's all right. Elias had known this question would come eventually, had dreaded it if he was honest. But Lucy had shared her grief with him, had trusted him with her pain. He owed her the same honesty. Her name was Sarah, he said quietly. We met in Kansas, got married when I was 28. She was smart, stubborn, had a laugh that could light up a whole room. We moved out here to make a fresh start, build something of our own. He paused, the memories both painful and precious. She got pregnant that first year. We were so happy, planned everything, the nursery, the cradle I built, all of it. Lucy waited, patient, giving him time. But the birth went wrong. Our son lived maybe an hour, long enough for me to hold him, to see his eyes open once. And Sarah, his voice roughened. She held on for 2 days, but she'd lost too much blood. Nothing the doctor could do. I buried them both on a Tuesday morning, and I thought that was it. Thought my life was over too. I'm sorry, Lucy said softly. That's a terrible kind of pain. It was. For a long time, I thought the only way to survive it was to shut down completely, not feel anything, not care about anything, just work until I was too tired to think, then sleep, and start over. I convinced myself that was living. He looked down at her. But it wasn't. It was just a slow kind of dying. What changed? You did. When I saw you on that road, something in me recognized something in you. We were both just enduring, getting through each day without really being alive. And I thought maybe we could do better together than we were doing apart. Lucy leaned against his shoulder, a gesture that had become familiar in recent weeks. Do you think Sarah would be angry? That you adopted me? No. He was certain of that, at least. Sarah wanted children more than anything. Wanted a house full of noise and laughter. She'd be glad to know her son's room was being used, that the cradle she never got to fill was rocking someone. She'd tell me I was doing right. I'll try to make her proud, Lucy said seriously. And your son, too. You already do. They might have sat there longer, but the sound of hoofbeats interrupted the moment. Elias stood quickly, his hand instinctively moving to the rifle he kept by the door. Visitors were rare out here, and unexpected ones even rarer. 2 riders crested the ridge, moving at an easy pace. As they drew closer, Elias relaxed slightly. He recognized the lead horse, belonged to Tom Brennan. The sheriff raised a hand in greeting. Elias, got a minute? Sure. Elias glanced at Lucy. Go inside, check on supper. She obeyed without question, but he saw the worry flicker across her face. He gave her what he hoped was a reassuring nod before turning his attention to the riders. Brennan dismounted, gesturing to his companion, a lean man in his 50s with sharp eyes and a badge pinned to his vest. This is Marshal Webb from Cheyenne. He's got some questions about a situation. Thought it best we come out personal rather than send word. Elias felt his shoulders tense. What kind of situation? Webb stepped forward, his expression neutral but assessing. We've been tracking a pair of drifters who've been causing trouble through this territory. Theft, assault, threatening behavior. They were seen heading this direction about 3 weeks back. You encounter anyone matching that description? Haven't seen anyone, Elias said carefully. What do they look like? One's tall, scarred face, missing 2 fingers on his left hand. Others shorter, stocky, has a tattoo of a snake on his neck. They tend to target isolated homesteads, places where there's not much help nearby. Elias kept his expression blank, but his mind was racing. 3 weeks ago, 2 men had indeed stopped at the ranch. He'd been out checking fence lines when he'd heard Lucy scream. By the time he'd gotten back to the house, The men had been circling her like wolves, asking questions about whether she lived alone, whether there was money on the property. He'd appeared with his rifle leveled and his voice cold as winter. "You got 3 seconds to mount up and ride out. After that, I start shooting." The men had laughed at first, made crude jokes about what they might do with the little girl. Elias had fired once, kicking up dust 6 inches from the tall one's boot. The laughter had died. "I don't miss twice," he'd said quietly. "And I don't give third chances. Leave, now." They'd left, but not before the shorter one had said, "We'll remember this place, old man. Might come back when you're not so alert." Elias had spent the next week sleeping light, his rifle always within reach. But the men hadn't returned, and eventually he'd convinced himself they'd moved on to easier targets. Now, looking at Marshal Webb's expectant face, he made a quick decision. "Yeah, they were here, about 3 weeks ago, like you said. Came sniffing around when I was out working. My daughter screamed and I came running, sent them off with a rifle." "Your daughter?" Webb's eyebrows rose. "Didn't know you had family, Crow." "Recent development. I'm adopting her. Papers are filed." Webb exchanged a glance with Brennan, then nodded. "These men say anything before they left? Make any threats?" "Said they might come back. I took it serious. Been keeping watch. But I haven't seen them since." "You did right to run them off," Webb said. "They've hit 2 more homesteads since then. One family lost everything they had. The other—" He paused. "Man was beaten pretty badly, wife and daughter traumatized. We're trying to track them down before someone gets killed." "If they come back here," Elias said flatly, "they won't leave." Webb studied him for a moment, then nodded. "I believe you. But keep alert, Crow. These aren't petty thieves. They're dangerous, and they hold grudges. The fact that you sent them packing might make you a target." After the lawmen left, Elias stood in the yard for a long moment, thinking. Then he walked inside, where Lucy was stirring a pot of stew with mechanical efficiency, her face pale. "You heard," he said. She nodded. "Those men, the ones who came before, they scared me." "I know, but they're gone, and they're not coming back." The marshal said they hold grudges. "Let them." Elias moved to the gun cabinet, pulled out his second rifle, checked the action. "I've got 2 good rifles, a shotgun, and enough ammunition to hold off an army. This house has solid walls and good sight lines. Anyone tries to come here meaning harm, they'll regret it." Lucy watched him prepare, her eyes wide. "Pa, what if they come when you're not here? What if I'm alone?" It was a fair question, one that had been nagging at him since Webb mentioned the drifters holding grudges. He couldn't be at the house every moment. There was work that took him out to the far pastures, repairs that needed doing on the fence lines. "Come here," he said. He led her to the gun cabinet and pulled out a small pistol, a Colt pocket revolver, nothing fancy, but reliable. "This was Sarah's. I taught her to shoot when we first moved out here. Now I'm going to teach you." "I'm 8 years old," Lucy said uncertainly. "Old enough to learn, and old enough to protect yourself if you have to. I'm not saying you'll need to use it, but I'd rather you know how and never need it than need it and not know how." They spent the next hour in the yard, Elias teaching Lucy the basics. How to hold the weapon, how to aim, how to squeeze the trigger instead of jerking it. She was small, and the revolver kicked harder than he liked, but she was determined, listening carefully to every instruction. "You don't shoot unless you have no other choice," he told her seriously. "You try to run first, try to hide. But if someone comes at you with bad intentions, if they won't stop, then you aim center mass and you shoot. You understand?" "Yes, Pa." "And Lucy, if you ever have to use this, it won't be your fault. You hear me? Whatever happens, it's not on you. It's on the person who made you defend yourself." She nodded, but he could see the weight of it settling on her young shoulders. He hated putting that burden there, hated that the world required it, but he hated the thought of her being defenseless even more. Over the following weeks, they fell into a new routine. Elias taught Lucy everything he could, not just ranch work, but survival skills. How to track, how to read weather, how to find water, where to hide if trouble came, how to use the rifle, the shotgun, the pistol. She absorbed it all with fierce concentration, understanding that knowledge might mean the difference between life and death. But they also found moments of lightness. Lucy discovered his late wife's books in a trunk and began reading aloud in the evenings. her voice bringing life to stories of far-off places. Elias taught her to play chess using a set his grandfather had carved, and discovered she had a sharp tactical mind. On Sundays they rested, spending long afternoons fishing in the creek or simply sitting on the porch talking. The adoption papers came back approved on a Tuesday morning in late September. Sheriff Brennan delivered them personally, along with a certificate declaring Lucy Harper to be legally and permanently Lucy Crow, daughter of Elias Crow, with all rights and privileges thereof. Lucy held the certificate with trembling hands, reading it over and over as if the words might disappear. "It's real," she whispered. "I'm really your daughter." "You've been my daughter since the day I found you," Elias said. "This just makes it official." That night he opened a bottle of wine he'd been saving for no particular occasion and let Lucy have a small glass mixed with water. They toasted to new beginnings, to family, to the future. Lucy's cheeks flushed pink from the wine, and she laughed, a sound he'd heard rarely enough that it made his chest ache with something like joy. "Pa?" she said as they cleaned up after their small celebration. "Are you happy?" The question caught him off guard. Was he happy? 6 months ago he would have said happiness was something for other people, something he'd used up his share of. But looking at Lucy now, seeing the trust in her eyes, the sense of belonging that had replaced her earlier wariness, yes, he was happy. Terrified sometimes, uncertain often, but happy in a way he'd thought impossible. "Yeah," he said, "I am. Are you?" "Yes." She said it with such simple certainty that he believed her completely. "I was so scared when Mama and Papa died, scared of being alone, scared of what would happen to me. But you saved me, Pa. You gave me a home." "We saved each other," he corrected gently. "Don't ever forget that." October brought the first real cold, frost creeping across the windows in the mornings, the wind carrying the promise of winter. Elias began preparing, stocking extra firewood, checking the barn roof, making sure they had sufficient supplies to last through heavy snow. Lucy helped with everything, her hands growing rougher with work, her shoulders stronger. They were bringing in the last of the hay one afternoon when Lucy suddenly went still, her eyes fixed on the eastern ridge. "Pa," she said quietly. "There's someone coming." Elias followed her gaze and felt his blood go cold. 2 riders silhouetted against the afternoon sun. Even at this distance he recognized the shapes. One tall and lean, one shorter and stocky. The drifters had come back. "Inside," he said, his voice absolutely calm. "Right now. Get the rifles ready." Lucy didn't argue, didn't panic. She walked quickly to the house while Elias continued forking hay, as if he hadn't noticed the approaching riders. But his mind was racing, calculating distances, angles, options. The men rode into the yard with deliberate slowness, their horses fresh, their expressions confident. The tall one, the one with the scarred face, smiled when he saw Elias. "Afternoon," he called out. "Remember us?" Elias set down his pitchfork carefully. "I do. I also remember telling you not to come back." "Well, that's the thing about being told what to do," the shorter man said, his hand resting casually on his pistol. "Makes a man want to do the opposite. We've been thinking about this place. About that little girl you got. Started wondering what a lone man like you is doing with a child." "Legal adoption," Elias said flatly. "All proper and documented. Sheriff knows all about it, so does the marshal. Speaking of which, they're looking for you boys. Something about theft and assault?" The scarred man's smile widened. "Well then, sounds like we all got secrets, don't it? How about this? You give us what we want, we forget we ever saw this place. What do you want?" "Money, food, supplies, and maybe some time with that little girl, just to make sure you've been treating her proper." Elias felt rage flood through him, cold and absolute, but his voice remained level. "You've got 3 seconds to turn around and ride out, same as last time." "Yeah, but this time you ain't got your rifle in hand," the shorter man pointed out. "This time, we're ready for you." "So is she," Elias said quietly. The window above them opened and Lucy appeared, the rifle Elias had taught her to use, aimed steady at the shorter man's chest. Her face was pale, but determined, her hands remarkably steady for a child. "I may be small," she called down, her voice shaking only slightly, "but Pa taught me good, and I don't miss when it matters." The scarred man laughed, but it sounded forced. Hell, you got the kid trained like a soldier. That's something. Last warning, Elias said. Leave, or we put you down. For a long moment, nobody moved. The tension stretched taut as wire. The afternoon suddenly too quiet, too still. Elias could see the calculation in the drifter's eyes, weighing odds, considering whether the potential reward was worth the very real risk. Then the scarred man's hand started to drop toward his gun, and Elias moved. He was 43 years old, hadn't been in a fight in 6 years, but muscle memory was a powerful thing. His hand found the pistol at his hip before conscious thought caught up, drew and fired in one smooth motion. The shot took the scarred man in the shoulder, spinning him half out of his saddle. The shorter man's horse reared at the gunshot, and he fought to control it while reaching for his own weapon. Lucy's rifle cracked from above, kicking dirt up between the horse's front hooves. The animal bolted, carrying its rider 30 yards before he managed to get it under control. Elias had his rifle out now, pulled from where he'd leaned it against the barn wall that morning. He leveled it at the shorter man, his aim absolutely steady. Next one goes through your chest, he said conversationally. Your partner's bleeding, but he'll live if you get him to a doctor. But you try one more stupid thing, and you'll both die right here in my yard. That what you want? The scarred man was clutching his shoulder, blood seeping through his fingers. His face had gone white with pain and shock. You shot me. You actually shot me. I warned you, twice. Now get out of here before I finish the job. The shorter man grabbed his partner's horse's reins and started backing away, his expression murderous, but his hands carefully away from his weapons. This ain't over, old man. We'll remember this. You do that, Elias said. And while you're remembering, remember this too. I'm done with warnings. You come back here, you come back to die. I'll bury you out back and no one will ever know. You understand me? The men retreated, the scarred one swaying in his saddle, both of them casting glances back that promised future violence, but they rode away, disappearing over the ridge. Elias kept his rifle trained on that ridge for a full minute after they'd vanished. Then he looked up at Lucy, still framed in the window. You all right? She nodded, but her hands were shaking now, adrenaline catching up with her. Did I do good? You did perfect. Exactly right. Now come down here. She appeared in this doorway moments later, and he pulled her into a fierce hug, feeling her small body trembling against him. You were so brave, he said into her hair. So damn brave. I was scared, she admitted. Being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means doing what needs doing despite the fear. You did that, Lucy. You protected our home. That night, Elias rode into town despite the late hour and reported everything to Sheriff Brennan. A posse formed within the hour, tracking the wounded drifters through the dark. They found them 20 miles north, the scarred man barely conscious from blood loss. Both men were arrested and transported to Cheyenne to face trial. Marshal Webb came by the ranch the next week to take statements. He listened to the whole story, then looked at Lucy with something like respect. Most grown men would have frozen, he told her. You did good, miss. Real good. Pa taught me, she said simply. Webb turned to Elias. You've raised her well, and for what it's worth, those men won't be back. They're looking at hard time for what they've done. You and your daughter are safe now. After he left, Lucy asked the question that had clearly been bothering her. Pa? When I pointed that rifle at that man, I meant it. If he'd drawn his gun, I would have shot him. Does that make me bad? Elias thought carefully before answering. Lucy, there's a difference between wanting to hurt someone and being willing to defend yourself and the people you love. You didn't want to shoot anyone, but you were willing to do it if necessary to protect us. That's not bad. That's strength. It didn't feel strong. It felt scary. Most important things do. He pulled her close. But you did right, and I'm proud of you. More proud than I can say. She leaned against him, and they sat on the porch watching the stars emerge. The crisis had passed, but Elias knew it had changed something between them. They weren't just father and daughter on paper now. They were partners who'd stood together against real danger and survived. They'd protected each other, trusted each other when it mattered most. As November arrived and the first snow began to fall, Elias found himself thinking about how much had changed in 6 months. He'd gone from a man convinced he was better off alone to a father fiercely protective of his daughter. Lucy had gone from a terrified orphan to a confident child who knew her own worth and strength. They'd built something real here. Not perfect, not without fear or difficulty, but real nonetheless. A family forged not by blood, but by choice, by shared hardship, by the simple decision to keep choosing each other every single day. And watching Lucy help him secure the barn against the coming storm, her face serious with concentration, her movements efficient and practiced, Elias knew with absolute certainty that he'd made the right choice that day on the road. The best choice of his entire life. They'd saved each other, and they'd keep saving each other, whatever the future held. Winter settled over the ranch with the quiet determination of something that intended to stay. By mid-November, snow lay thick across the pastures, transforming the landscape into an endless expanse of white, broken only by fence posts and the dark shapes of cattle huddled against the wind. Elias had weathered 17 Wyoming winters on this land, but this was the first one that didn't feel like endurance, the first one that felt like living. Lucy stood at the kitchen window on a gray morning in late November, her breath fogging the glass as she watched snow fall in thick, lazy flakes. She'd grown 2 inches since summer, her dresses already needing to be let out, her face losing some of its sharp angles as regular meals did their work. But it was the change in her eyes that struck Elias most. The haunted look had faded, replaced by something steadier, more certain. "How deep do you think it'll get?" she asked, tracing patterns in the condensation with one finger. "Another 6 inches by nightfall, maybe 8. Elias was repairing a harness at the table, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. "We'll need to check on the cattle this afternoon, make sure they can get to the hay we put out. Can I come with you? Long as you bundle up proper. Cold like this can turn dangerous fast if you're not careful." She turned from the window, and he saw the small smile playing at her lips. "You say that every time we go out." "And I'll keep saying it until you're grown and gone, probably longer. That's what fathers do. They worry." "Mama used to say the same thing." Lucy's voice went soft, the way it always did when she mentioned her parents. "She'd worry about everything. Papa would tease her about it, but gentle-like. Said her worrying was just love wearing a different coat." Elias set down the harness. "That's a good way to think of it. Your mama was smart." "She was." Lucy moved to the stove, checking the beans they'd set to soak overnight. "Pa, can I ask you something?" "Always." "Do you think about them much? Sarah and your son?" The question didn't sting the way it might have 6 months ago. Time and Lucy's presence had softened the edges of that grief, made it something he could carry without feeling crushed by the weight. "Every day," he admitted. "Not the way I used to, though. Used to think about them and feel nothing but pain. Now it's more like remembering something good that ended too soon. The pain's still there, but so is the happiness we had." Lucy nodded slowly, considering this. "I'm glad. I'd hate to think I was making you forget them." "You're not making me forget anything. You're just giving me new things to remember alongside the old. There's room for both, Lucy. A heart's bigger than people think." She came and sat across from him at the table, her small hands folded in that serious way she had. "I had a dream last night about Mama and Papa. They were standing in a field somewhere, and Mama was smiling. She said to tell you thank you for taking care of me." Elias felt his throat tighten. Just a dream, maybe. Maybe, but it felt real. And it made me think, I've been so worried about forgetting them, about moving on being some kind of betrayal. But maybe they'd want me to be happy. Maybe they'd be glad I found you. I know they would be. Any parent would want their child safe and loved. That's all that matters in the end. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the only sound the crackle of the fire and the whisper of wind against the windows. Then Lucy spoke again, her voice careful. "There's a Christmas social at the church next month. Martha Brennan mentioned it when we were in town last week. She said families usually go together." Elias understood what she was really asking. In the 6 months since he'd taken Lucy in, they'd mostly kept to themselves. He'd gone to town for supplies, occasionally brought her along, but they hadn't participated in community events, hadn't tried to integrate into the social fabric of Sweetwater. Part of him wanted to refuse. Christmas socials meant people asking questions, making judgments, inserting themselves into business that wasn't theirs. But another part, The part that was learning to be a father recognized the longing in Lucy's voice. "You want to go?" he asked. "Only if you do. I don't want to make you uncomfortable." "Lucy, I've been uncomfortable most of my adult life. That's not a good enough reason to deny you something you want. If you want to go to the social, we'll go." Her face lit up with a joy so pure it made his chest ache. "Really? Really? But we'll need to make something to bring. That's how these things work, isn't it? Everyone contributes food? Martha said people usually bring pies or cookies. I could make cookies. You've been teaching me to bake." "Then that's what we'll do. Fair warning, though, my baking instruction is probably going to result in some questionable cookies." Lucy laughed, the sound filling the small kitchen with warmth. "They'll be perfect because we made them together. That's what matters." The afternoon chores took them out into the teeth of the storm. Elias had been right about the snow. It was coming down heavy now, visibility reduced to maybe 30 yards. They worked quickly, breaking ice on the water troughs, distributing hay, counting heads to make sure no cattle had wandered off or gotten into trouble. Lucy moved beside him with efficiency born of months of practice, never complaining about the cold, even though her cheeks burned red and her breath came in white clouds. She'd learned to read the weather, to anticipate what needed doing, to work as a team without constant instruction. More than once, Elias caught himself feeling grateful not just for her company, but for her competence. They were heading back to the house, their work finished, when Lucy suddenly grabbed his arm. "Pa, look!" He followed her pointing finger and felt his blood go cold. Fresh tracks in the snow leading away from the barn toward the tree line. Boot prints, not hoof prints. Someone had been here while they were out with the cattle. Elias's hand went to his rifle automatically. "Get behind me. Stay close." They approached the barn cautiously, Elias scanning for any sign of movement. The tracks led to the barn door, then back out again, disappearing into the trees. Whoever had made them was gone now, but the violation of their space made his skin crawl. Inside the barn, nothing seemed disturbed at first glance. The horses stood calm in their stalls. The tools hung in their proper places. But then Lucy pointed to something scratched into the wooden support beam near the door, fresh marks, cut deep into the wood. "We know where you live." 5 words. Simple. Threatening. Impossible to misinterpret. Elias felt rage and fear war in his chest. The drifters were supposed to be in jail awaiting trial. Marshal Webb had promised they'd be locked up tight. So who had left this message? "Inside," he said quietly. "Now. And bolt the door behind us." That evening, he rode to town through the storm, leaving Lucy barricaded in the house with both rifles and strict instructions not to open the door for anyone but him. Sheriff Brennan listened to his report with a deepening frown. "The men we arrested are still in custody," he confirmed. "I got a wire from Cheyenne just yesterday. But they've been talking, Elias, bragging about their connections, about having friends who'll settle scores." "So, someone's trying to intimidate me on their behalf." "Looks that way. I'll send word to the marshal, get some deputies out to your place, but in the meantime, you watch your back, and keep that girl close." "I intend to." Brennan studied him for a moment. "You know, when you first brought Lucy to town, I had my doubts. Thought maybe you were biting off more than you could chew. But you've done right by her, Elias. She's thriving. Don't let these bastards take that away from you." "They won't. I'll burn the ranch to the ground before I let anyone hurt her." The ride home took twice as long as usual, the storm making every landmark unfamiliar. By the time Elias reached the house, he was half frozen and completely exhausted. But Lucy had kept the fire burning bright, had soup hot on the stove, had proven once again that she could be trusted even in his absence. "Everything all right?" she asked as he came through the door. "Will be. Sheriff's sending help. We just need to stay alert for a while." Over the next 2 weeks, Elias barely slept. Every sound outside sent him reaching for his rifle. Every shadow seemed suspicious. Lucy noticed, of course. She was too perceptive not to. But she didn't complain. Instead, she helped however she could, taking on extra chores so he could rest, keeping watch from the window while he caught brief naps. 2 deputies arrived from Cheyenne, young men with keen eyes and quick hands. They camped in the barn, keeping watch in shifts. Their presence helped, but Elias couldn't fully relax. Whoever had left that message was still out there, biding their time. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A ranch hand from the neighboring spread, 15 miles east, Came riding in one morning with news. He'd caught a man skulking around their property the night before, run him off with gunfire. The man had dropped a satchel in his haste to escape, and inside were items stolen from 3 different ranches, along with a crudely drawn map marking homesteads throughout the valley, including Elias's ranch. The deputies used the map to track the thief to an abandoned line shack in the foothills. They found him there along with 2 accomplices, all of them affiliated with the jailed drifters. The arrest was clean, the evidence overwhelming. Within a day, all 3 were in custody, and the threat, at least this particular threat, was neutralized. When the deputies came to deliver the news, Lucy was helping Elias repair the chicken coop. She listened to their report with the same serious expression she wore when learning ranch tasks, then asked the question that had clearly been bothering her. Will there be more? More people coming after us because of what we did? The older deputy, a man named Carson, crouched down to her level. Miss Lucy, I won't lie to you. There's always a chance. Bad men have long memories sometimes. But here's what you need to understand. You and your pa did the right thing. You stood up to bullies, protected your home. That takes courage. And sometimes courage makes you a target, but it also makes you strong. And strength is what survives out here. So we just keep being careful? You keep being careful, you keep being smart, and you keep being there for each other. That's all any of us can do. After the deputies left, Elias and Lucy finished the repairs in silence. Finally, as they were putting away tools, Lucy spoke. Pa, I'm not sorry we fought back, even if it means people might come after us. I'm not sorry. Good, because I'm not either. What kind of life would it be, always backing down, always letting fear make our decisions? That's not living, Lucy. That's just surviving. Mama used to say something like that. She said fear was a poor compass because it only ever points away from things, never toward them. Your mama was wise. Elias hung the hammer on its hook. We've got a choice ahead of us, you know. We could sell this place, move somewhere else, start fresh where nobody knows our history. Lucy's eyes widened. Do you want to do that? I'm asking what you want. She was quiet for a long moment, her gaze sweeping across the snow-covered pastures, the barn they'd just repaired, the small house that had become home. When she looked back at him, her expression was resolute. I want to stay. This is our place, Pa. We've fought for it, bled for it. I don't want to run just because some bad men might hold a grudge. I want to stand our ground. Elias felt pride swell in his chest. 8 years old, and she had more backbone than most grown men he knew. Then we stay, and we make damn sure this place is worth defending. December arrived with brutal cold and clear skies. Elias and Lucy threw themselves into preparations for winter's worst, reinforcing structures, stockpiling supplies, making sure every system was sound. But they also made time for the cookies, 3 batches, each one slightly better than the last, until they had something that actually resembled edible food. The night before the Christmas social, Lucy tried on the new dress Martha Brennan had helped her pick out during their last supply run. It was deep green wool, practical but pretty, with white lace at the collar. She stood in front of the small mirror Elias had hung in her room, smoothing the fabric with nervous hands. What if people are mean? She asked quietly. What if they say things about us? About a man raising a girl alone? Elias appeared in the doorway. Then we smile, we're polite, and we don't give them the satisfaction of seeing it bother us. People talk, Lucy. That's what they do. But their talk doesn't change the truth of what we are to each other. What are we? I mean, I know you're my pa now, legally and everything, but what do we tell people when they ask how this came to be? He moved into the room and sat on the edge of her bed. We tell them the truth. That I found you when you needed help, and you gave me a reason to start living again. That we chose each other, and that choice matters more than blood. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me. Lucy turned from the mirror, and Elias saw tears shining in her eyes. I wish Mama and Papa could see me now, could see that I'm all right, that I'm more than all right. I think they can, he said gently. I think they're watching, and they're proud as hell. The social was held in the church hall, a modest building that had been decorated with pine boughs and candles. When Elias and Lucy arrived, stepping through the door with their tin of cookies, conversation stuttered to a halt. Every eye in the room turned to them, assessing, judging, speculating. Elias felt Lucy's hand slip into his, her grip tight. He squeezed back, a silent message of solidarity, and walked into the room with his head high. Martha Brennan was the first to approach, her smile genuine and warm. "Elias, Lucy, I'm so glad you came. Those cookies smell wonderful. Let me take them to the dessert table." Other faces turned friendlier at Martha's lead. The schoolteacher, Miss Hayes, came over to introduce herself to Lucy. Several ranchers Elias knew by sight nodded greetings. But there were cold faces, too, whispered conversations behind hands, looks that made their skepticism clear. An older woman Elias didn't recognize approached with the tight-lipped expression of someone preparing to deliver judgment. "Mr. Crow, is it? I'm Mrs. Hawthorne. I couldn't help but notice you've brought a child. Your daughter, I'm told?" "That's right. This is Lucy." Mrs. Hawthorne's eyes raked over Lucy with obvious disapproval. "Rather unusual, isn't it? A single man raising a young girl. People talk, you understand. They wonder about the propriety of such an arrangement." Elias felt his jaw tighten, but before he could respond, Lucy spoke up, her voice clear and steady. "My parents died, ma'am. Fever took them both. Pa found me alone on the road and gave me a home when no one else would. He's taught me to read and write and work a ranch. He makes sure I eat proper and stay warm and know I'm safe. I don't see anything improper about kindness." Mrs. Hawthorne's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. Around them, several people had stopped to listen, including Sheriff Brennan, who was trying not to smile. "Well," Mrs. Hawthorne finally managed, "I suppose that's very fortunate for you." "Yes, ma'am, it is. I'm the luckiest girl in Wyoming." The woman retreated, and Elias looked down at Lucy with something like awe. "You didn't have to defend me like that." "Yes, I did, because it's true, and because you do the same for me." The evening progressed more smoothly after that small confrontation. Lucy found herself surrounded by other children, cautiously making friends with a girl named Emma, whose father ran the general store. Elias talked with other ranchers about cattle and weather and the usual concerns of men who made their living from unforgiving land. But the moment that mattered most came near the end of the evening, when Reverend Morrison, a kind man in his 60s, approached Elias with a thoughtful expression. "Mr. Crow, I wonder if I might have a word." They stepped aside from the crowd, and the Reverend spoke quietly. "I've been watching you and your daughter this evening, seeing how she looks at you, how you are with her, and I wanted to say what you've done is a godly thing, taking in an orphan, giving her a home and a future. That's what faith looks like when it's lived, not just spoken." "I'm not a religious man," Elias said honestly. "Haven't been to a service in years." "Perhaps not. But you're living the principles better than most who warm these pews every Sunday. That child was lost, and you found her. She was alone, and you gave her family. That matters, Mr. Crow. That matters more than anything." The words settled into Elias like warmth spreading through cold limbs. He hadn't sought approval, hadn't needed validation for his choice. But hearing it anyway, hearing that someone understood what he and Lucy had built together, meant more than he would have expected. "Thank you, Reverend. That's kind of you to say. It's simply the truth. And if you ever need anything, support, assistance, just someone to talk to, my door is always open. For both of you." As they rode home that night, Lucy practically vibrated with excitement, talking about the people she'd met, the food she'd tasted, the decorations she'd admired. Elias listened, content to let her enthusiasm wash over him. "Pa?" she said, as the ranch came into view under a sky brilliant with stars. "Tonight was perfect. Thank you for taking me. You're the one who wanted to go. I just drove the wagon." "No. You did more than that. You stood beside me when people were judging. You let me speak for myself but stayed close in case I needed you. You showed everyone that we're a real family, not just some temporary arrangement." "We are a real family," Elias said firmly. "Anyone who thinks different doesn't know what they're talking about." Lucy was quiet for a moment, then, "Emma invited me to her house next week to practice sewing. Can I go?" The question represented something bigger than a simple play date. It meant Lucy was putting down roots, making connections, building a life beyond just the ranch and her relationship with him. Part of Elias wanted to say no, wanted to keep her close where he knew she was safe, but he recognized that impulse for what it was, fear wearing the mask of protection. If you want to go, you can go. I'll take you into town and pick you up after. You're sure? You won't worry too much? Oh, I'll worry, but I'm learning that worry and trust can exist together. I trust you to be smart and careful. The worrying is just my problem to manage. Christmas morning arrived cold and clear. Elias had never been one for elaborate celebrations, but he'd made an effort this year. A small pine tree stood in the corner of the main room, decorated with strings of popcorn Lucy had made and a few glass ornaments that had belonged to Sarah. Under it sat 2 packages wrapped in brown paper. Lucy emerged from her room to find Elias already up, coffee brewing, the fire crackling cheerfully. Her eyes went wide at the sight of the presents. "Pa, you didn't have to open them," he said gruffly, suddenly nervous that his choices might disappoint. The first package contained a new winter coat, deep blue wool with horn buttons. The second held books, 3 of them, including a collection of poems Lucy had mentioned wanting after seeing it in the general store. "These are perfect," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "But I didn't get you anything. I don't have any money." "Lucy, you've given me more than you know. You don't owe me presents." But she disappeared into her room and returned carrying something wrapped in cloth. "I made this. It's not much, but I wanted you to have something." He unwrapped the cloth carefully and found a scarf she'd knitted. The stitches uneven in places, a few dropped threads, but made with obvious care and effort. She must have been working on it in secret for weeks. "It's perfect," he said, and meant it. He wrapped the scarf around his neck immediately, feeling the scratch of the wool against his skin. "I'll wear it every day." They spent the morning quietly, Lucy reading her new books while Elias worked on repairs. But there was a contentment in the silence, a sense of peace that Elias hadn't felt in years. This was what a home was supposed to feel like, not just a structure to keep out the cold, but a place where people who cared about each other chose to be together. That afternoon, as Lucy helped him with chores, she asked a question that had clearly been building for a while. "Pa, what happens when I'm grown? When I don't need you anymore?" Elias paused in mucking out a stall, considering his answer carefully. "Well, I imagine you'll make your own choices. Maybe you'll want to stay and run this ranch. Maybe you'll want to see the world, try something different. Whatever you choose, I'll support it. But you'll still be my pa, even if I leave?" "Always. That doesn't change. You'll always be my daughter, Lucy, no matter where you go or what you do. That's what family means. It's permanent." She seemed relieved by this answer, her shoulders relaxing. "Good, because I can't imagine not having you in my life, even when I'm old." "Well, I'll probably be dead by then," Elias said pragmatically. "I'm already 43. By the time you're old, I'll be long gone." "Don't say that." Her voice went sharp with sudden fear. "Don't even joke about it." He set down his shovel and pulled her into a hug. "I'm sorry, that was thoughtless. But Lucy, someday it will happen. I won't be here forever. And when that day comes, I need you to be strong enough to keep going, to live a full life without me. Can you promise me that?" She was quiet against his chest, then nodded slowly. "I promise. But not for a long time, right? You're healthy. You take care of yourself. We have years and years." "We do," he agreed, hoping it was true. Years and years. As winter deepened and the new year arrived, life settled into comfortable rhythms. Lucy started attending the small school in Sweetwater 2 days a week, making friends, learning things Elias couldn't teach her. He watched her confidence grow, watched her transform from a frightened orphan into a spirited girl who knew her own mind. But the lessons from their confrontation with the drifters stayed with both of them. They remained vigilant, kept weapons accessible, never took their safety for granted. It wasn't paranoia, it was practical awareness of the reality they lived in. One evening in late January, as they sat by the fire, Lucy reading aloud from one of her books while Elias whittled a new tool handle, she paused mid-sentence. "Pa, do you ever regret it? Stopping that day? Taking me in?" He looked up from his work, meeting her eyes. "Not once. Not for a single second. You're the best thing that's happened to me in a decade, Lucy. You brought this old house back to life. You gave me a reason to care about tomorrow. Why would I regret that?" "Because it's been hard sometimes. Dangerous. People judge us. We've had to fight, literally fight, to protect our home." "All true. But that's life, isn't it? The things worth having are usually the things you have to fight for. And you, Lucy Crow, are worth every moment of worry, every sleepless night, every challenge we've faced. She set down her book and came to sit beside him on the floor, leaning her head against his knee. I love you, Pa. I don't think I've said that before, but I do. I love you. The words hit him like a physical blow, unexpected, overwhelming, precious beyond measure. He set down his whittling knife with hands that wanted to shake. I love you too, Lucy. More than I thought I could love anything anymore. You saved my life as much as I saved yours. They sat together in the firelight, father and daughter by choice rather than blood, bound by something stronger than mere circumstance. Outside, wind howled across the frozen prairie, promising months of cold still to come. But inside, warmth reigned, the warmth of connection, of family, of two people who'd found each other in the loneliest moment and chosen to build something lasting. The future remained uncertain. Threats might return. Challenges would surely arise. But Elias knew with absolute certainty that whatever came next, they would face it together. That was the promise they'd made to each other. Not in words, perhaps, but in every shared task, every quiet evening, every moment they chose connection over isolation. And that promise, he thought, watching Lucy return to her book with a contented smile, was worth more than all the safety in the world. Spring came late that year, winter clinging stubbornly to the high country well into April. But when it finally released its grip, the transformation was swift and dramatic. Snow melted into rushing creeks, grass pushed green through the brown earth, and the air filled with the smell of sage and new growth. Lucy turned 9 in March, celebrated with a cake that only partly collapsed, and gifts from townspeople who'd grown to accept the unlikely family living 15 miles north. She'd changed in the months since that confrontation with the drifters, grown taller and stronger, her hands roughened by work, her gaze more direct. But more than physical changes, there was a confidence in her now that hadn't existed before. She carried herself like someone who knew her worth, who understood she belonged exactly where she was. Elias was mending fence on a bright May morning when he saw the dust cloud approaching from town. Company was less unusual now than it had been. Lucy's friendship with Emma meant occasional visits, and Sheriff Brennan stopped by every few weeks just to check in. But something about this rider made him wary. The horse was moving fast, purposeful, and as it drew closer, he recognized the marshal's distinctive gray gelding. Webb dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, his face grim. Elias, we've got a problem. Lucy appeared from the barn where she'd been cleaning tack, her instincts sharp enough to recognize trouble. Elias caught her eye and gestured her over. What kind of problem? He asked. The kind with a trial date. Those drifters you tangled with? They're being tried in Cheyenne next month. Judge wants you and Lucy to testify. Elias felt his stomach drop. Testify? That means leaving the ranch, going to the city. For at least a week, maybe 2, depending on how the trial goes. I know it's asking a lot, but your testimony is crucial. You're the victims who fought back, who can speak to their pattern of behavior. Without you, the prosecutor's case is weaker. And if we don't go? Webb's expression hardened. Then 2 dangerous men might walk free, and they'll remember who put them in that cell in the first place. Lucy had been listening quietly, her face thoughtful. Now she spoke up, her voice steady. We have to go, Pa. We can't let them hurt other people just because we're scared of leaving home. I'm not scared, Elias said automatically, then stopped himself. That's not true. I am scared. Scared of putting you in danger. Scared of what might happen if we're gone that long. The ranch will be fine, Webb said. I can arrange for a couple of hands to stay here, keep things running. You've got good neighbors who'll help, and Cheyenne's safe enough. You'll be under protection the whole time. Elias looked at Lucy, seeing the determination in her young face. She was right, damn it. They'd stood up to those men once. Finishing the job meant seeing them properly punished. All right, he said finally. We'll go. But I need guarantees about her safety, Webb. No chances, no risks. You have my word. I'll escort you personally. The next 3 weeks passed in a flurry of preparation. Elias arranged for 2 ranch hands from a neighboring spread to stay at the property, showed them every detail of the operation. Lucy packed carefully, choosing her best dresses, the ones that made her look like a respectable rancher's daughter, rather than a girl who could shoot straight and muck stalls. The night before they were scheduled to leave, she came to find Elias on the porch, where he sat watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Can't sleep? He asked. Too much thinking. She settled beside him on the steps. Pa, what if I mess up when I testify? What if I say the wrong thing and they go free because of me? You won't mess up. You'll tell the truth, same as always. That's all anyone can ask. But what if the truth isn't enough? Elias was quiet for a moment, watching the light fade. Then it isn't enough, and we deal with whatever comes. But Lucy, you need to understand something. What we're doing, standing up, speaking out, refusing to be silent, that matters regardless of the outcome. Those men tried to make us victims. We're choosing to be witnesses instead. That choice has power. Mama used to say something like that. She said silence was how bad things grew strong, and speaking up was how good things survived. Your mama was right about a lot of things. They sat together as full dark fell, neither speaking, just drawing comfort from proximity. Finally, Lucy broke the silence with a question that had clearly been weighing on her. After the trial, when we come home, things will go back to normal, right? We'll still be just us, living our life? That's the plan. Why? Because I like our life, Pa. I like the quiet and the work and the evenings by the fire. I don't want things to change. Things always change, Lucy. That's the nature of living. But the important things, you and me, this family we've built, those don't change. Those are permanent. She leaned against his shoulder and he wrapped an arm around her, holding her close as stars began to appear overhead. Tomorrow they'd leave for Cheyenne, step into uncertainty and potential danger. But tonight, they were home, together, safe in the knowledge that whatever came next, they'd face it as they faced everything, side by side. The journey to Cheyenne took 3 days. Marshal Webb riding alongside their wagon, 2 additional deputies following at a distance. They stopped at way stations each night, Lucy sleeping in proper beds while Elias kept watch, his rifle always within reach. She handled the travel better than he'd expected, curious about the changing landscape, excited by the growing signs of civilization as they approached the territorial capital. Cheyenne itself was a shock after months of isolation. The noise, the crowds, the constant motion, it overwhelmed them both. Webb had arranged rooms at a modest hotel near the courthouse, and Elias made Lucy stay inside while he familiarized himself with the surroundings, mapping escape routes and safe havens with the paranoia of a man who'd learned not to trust in luck. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Catherine Marsh, met with them the evening before the trial. She was younger than Elias had expected, maybe 30, with the kind of intense focus that suggested she didn't lose cases often. "I'll be direct with you both," she said, settling into a chair across from them in their hotel room. "This trial is going to be difficult. The defense will try to paint you as the aggressors, claim you overreacted to innocent travelers. They'll suggest that a single man raising a young girl has questionable motives, that your testimony is fabricated to cover improper behavior." Elias felt rage flare hot in his chest, but Lucy spoke before he could. "Let them try," she said quietly. "Anyone who looks at us will see the truth. We're a family, and we defended ourselves against men who meant us harm. That's not a story, that's fact." Marsh smiled, genuine warmth breaking through her professional demeanor. "You're a remarkable young woman, Lucy. Hold on to that clarity when you're on the stand. Don't let them shake you." "I won't," Lucy promised. The trial began on a Tuesday morning in late May. The courtroom was packed with spectators, journalists, curious onlookers drawn by the sensational elements of the case. Elias sat in the front row, Lucy beside him, both of them dressed in their best clothes, presenting the image of respectable frontier citizens. The defendants, the scarred man was named Coulter, his partner Jackson, sat at the defense table looking sullen and hostile. They'd cleaned up for trial, but there was no disguising the violence in their eyes, the barely contained rage at being brought to account. The prosecution built its case methodically over 2 days, calling witnesses from other homesteads, presenting evidence of theft and assault, establishing a pattern of predatory behavior. Then it was time for Elias to take the stand. He walked to the witness box with measured steps, placed his hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth. The prosecutor led him through the events carefully, finding Lucy, the first encounter with the drifters, their return weeks later, the shooting. "Mr. Crow," Marsh asked, "when you fired at Mr. Coulter, what was your intent?" "To stop him. He was reaching for his weapon. I had my daughter in the house, 2 armed men in my yard making threats. I did what any father would do. I protected my child." The defense attorney, a portly man named Simmons, rose for cross-examination with the aggressive confidence of someone convinced he could tear apart the prosecution's case. Mr. Crow, you claim these men were threatening, but isn't it true you fired first, that you shot an unarmed man without provocation? He wasn't unarmed. He had a pistol on his hip and his hand was moving toward it. So you say, but we only have your word for that. Convenient, isn't it? You shoot a man, nearly kill him, and then claim self-defense? I don't claim anything. I'm telling you what happened. Simmons paced in front of the witness box. Let's talk about your daughter, Mr. Crow. Or should I say, the girl you've taken in. Rather unusual arrangement, wouldn't you say? A single man, living alone, suddenly taking in a young girl. Elias felt his hands clench on the armrests. I adopted Lucy legally. All the paperwork is in order. After the fact, yes. But initially you just brought her home with you. Didn't report finding her right away. Didn't seek proper authorities. Why is that? Because she needed help immediately. She was alone, orphaned, in danger. I provided shelter and safety. Or perhaps you saw an opportunity. A vulnerable child, no family to protect her. Objection! Marsh was on her feet, her voice sharp. Counsel is implying impropriety with no evidence whatsoever. This is beyond inappropriate. The judge, a gray-haired man with piercing eyes, nodded. Sustained. Mr. Simmons, you will confine yourself to relevant questions about the incident in question. But the damage was done. The insinuation hung in the air, ugly and persistent. Elias saw several jurors exchange glances, saw doubt creeping into expressions that had been sympathetic. Simmons changed tactics. Mr. Crow, you teach this child to shoot, correct? I do. It's a necessary skill on a ranch, including how to aim at human beings, including how to defend herself if necessary. So when these men arrived at your property, you had already armed and trained a child to potentially kill someone. Doesn't that suggest you were looking for confrontation? It suggests I was prepared to protect my family. There's a difference. The cross-examination continued for another hour, Simmons trying to paint Elias as paranoid, aggressive, possibly predatory. But Elias held his ground, answering each question with calm precision, never losing his temper despite obvious provocation. When he finally stepped down, Lucy squeezed his hand. You did good, Pa. Your turn tomorrow, he said quietly. You ready? I am. I won't let them make us into something we're not. That night, Marsh came to their hotel to prepare Lucy for her testimony. She was gentle but thorough, warning Lucy about the kinds of questions she'd face, the way the defense would try to confuse or intimidate her. Remember, Marsh said, you're not on trial. They are. You're a victim who defended herself. Don't let them make you forget that. Lucy listened carefully, asked smart questions, showed the same quick intelligence that had helped her learn ranch work so efficiently. Watching her prepare, Elias felt pride swell in his chest. She was so young, but she had a core of steel that no amount of legal maneuvering could bend. The next morning, Lucy walked to the witness stand with her head high, her hands steady as she swore her oath. She looked small in the wooden chair, her feet barely touching the floor, but her voice rang clear when Marsh began questioning her. Lucy, can you tell the court what happened on the day you first encountered the defendants? Yes, ma'am. I was working in the garden when two men rode into our yard. Pa was out checking fence. They started asking questions, where my pa was, if we had money, if I was alone often. The way they looked at me made me scared. I screamed for Pa, and he came running with his rifle. He told them to leave, and they did. But before they left, the shorter one, Mr. Jackson, said they might come back. And did they come back? Yes, ma'am. About 3 weeks later. Pa and I were working when they rode in again. This time, they made threats, said they wanted money and supplies, and said things about me that I won't repeat. Pa told them to leave. The tall one, Mr. Coulter, reached for his gun. Pa shot him in the shoulder. I had a rifle in the window, aimed at Mr. Jackson to keep him from drawing his weapon. Marsh nodded encouragingly. Lucy, some people might say that shooting someone is an extreme response. Why do you think your father felt it was necessary? Lucy looked directly at the jury, her gaze steady and honest. Because those men weren't there to talk. They came to take what wasn't theirs, and they didn't care who they hurt doing it. Pa gave them chances to leave. 2 different times, he gave them chances. They chose to come back with bad intentions. What happened after that is on them, not us. The courtroom was completely silent. Lucy's simple, clear testimony had a power that legal arguments couldn't match. She was a child speaking truth without embellishment, and the jury was listening. Then Simmons stood for cross-examination, and Elias felt his jaw clench. If that man said one wrong word to Lucy, one thing that crossed the line, Elias would be out of his seat regardless of consequences. But Simmons had apparently learned something from his earlier reprimand. His questions to Lucy were pointed but not cruel, focused on inconsistencies rather than insinuation. Miss Crow, you said you were frightened when the men first appeared, yet you screamed for your father rather than running or hiding. Why? Because I knew Pa would protect me, and I was right. You seem very confident in your father's abilities. Has he ever been violent before? Ever hurt anyone? No, sir. Pa's the gentlest person I know. He's patient when he teaches me things, kind to animals, fair in his dealings. But he's also strong when he needs to be. That's what good fathers do. They protect their children. And you've known him how long? 7 months? 8? Almost 9 months now, sir. Rather quick to be so certain of someone's character, isn't it? Lucy tilted her head, considering the question seriously. I knew my first parents my whole life before they died. I knew within hours of meeting Pa that he was a good man. Sometimes you just know things, sir. Sometimes trust isn't about time. It's about truth. Several jurors nodded, and Elias saw Simmons's frustration as his questioning failed to shake Lucy's credibility. He tried a few more approaches, but Lucy answered each question with the same simple honesty, never wavering, never contradicting herself. When she finally stepped down, Elias pulled her into a fierce hug. You were perfect, he whispered. I just told the truth, she said. Like you taught me. The trial continued for 3 more days, expert witnesses testifying about ballistics and wounds, character witnesses speaking to the defendant's history of violence. The defense tried to argue that Coulter and Jackson were simply unlucky drifters who'd stumbled into a misunderstanding, but the weight of evidence was overwhelming. On the final day, both sides made closing arguments. Simmons painted his clients as victims of an overzealous homesteader with a suspicious living arrangement. Marsh countered with a precise dismantling of that narrative, pointing to the documented pattern of theft and assault, the multiple witnesses, the physical evidence of the defendant's intentions. But it was her final words that seemed to resonate most powerfully. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about more than 2 men who made bad choices. It's about whether we, as a society, will protect those who defend themselves and their families against predators. Elias Crow and his daughter Lucy did nothing wrong. They stood their ground against men who came to their home with violence in their hearts. They refused to be victims. And now we must refuse to punish them for their courage. We must refuse to send the message that defending your home, your child, your very life, is somehow a crime. The defense would have you believe that Mr. Crow overreacted, that he should have waited until actual violence occurred before protecting his daughter. But we don't ask people to wait until they're being murdered before they defend themselves. We trust them to recognize genuine threat and respond appropriately. Mr. Crow did exactly that, and his daughter, brave beyond her years, supported him as any child should be able to rely on their parent. These defendants are not victims. They're predators who finally met someone unwilling to be prey. I ask you to find them guilty on all counts. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Elias and Lucy waited in a small room off the main courthouse, neither speaking much, both lost in their own thoughts. Marshal Webb checked on them periodically, bringing coffee and reassurance, but even he looked tense. When the bailiff finally came to summon them back, Elias felt his heart hammering. Lucy's hand found his, her small fingers gripping tight. The jury filed back in, their faces unreadable. The judge asked the foreman if they'd reached a verdict. We have, Your Honor. On the charges of attempted robbery, how do you find? Guilty. On the charges of assault with intent to commit bodily harm? Guilty. On the charges of conspiracy to commit theft? Guilty. The word echoed through the courtroom 3 more times, guilty on every count. Elias felt Lucy sag against him with relief, felt his own breath release in a rush he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Coulter and Jackson were led away in chains, both men shooting murderous looks at Elias and Lucy. But they were going to prison, probably for 20 years or more. They wouldn't be threatening anyone's home again. Outside the courthouse, Marsh approached with a tired but genuine smile. You two did excellent work in there. That testimony made the case. What happens now? Lucy asked. Now they're sentenced, sent to the territorial prison, and you go home. You're safe, Lucy. You and your father both. That evening, Webb took them to a restaurant to celebrate. A real restaurant with white tablecloths and multiple courses. Lucy's eyes went wide at the menu, at the sheer abundance of choices. She ordered carefully, conscious of cost despite Elias telling her to get whatever she wanted. To justice, Webb said, raising his glass. And to the bravest young woman I've ever had the privilege of knowing. Lucy blushed, but clinked her glass of lemonade against his. I wasn't that brave. I was scared the whole time. Being brave means acting despite fear, Webb said. Anyone who isn't scared in the face of danger is just stupid. You were scared and you still stood up. That's real courage. They left Cheyenne 2 days later, both of them eager to get home. The journey back felt different, lighter somehow, as if a weight they'd been carrying had finally been lifted. They talked more on this trip, Lucy sharing her impressions of the city, Elias admitting that parts of the trial had terrified him more than the actual confrontation with the drifters. Words can be weapons too, he said, sometimes sharper than guns. But truth is stronger, Lucy said. That's what I learned. As long as we stick to truth, we can't really be hurt. Not in ways that matter. When the ranch finally came into view, both of them felt the same rush of homecoming. The hands who'd been managing things had done good work. The place looked well-maintained, the animals healthy, but it was clear they were eager to return to their own spread. After they'd paid the men and sent them on their way, Elias and Lucy stood in the yard, just breathing in the familiar air, the smell of sage and grass and home. I'm glad we went, Lucy said. I'm glad we testified and those men are being punished, but I'm even more glad to be back. Me too. This place, it's ours, Lucy. We fought for it twice now, once with guns, once with words. I'd say that makes it well and truly ours. They spent the rest of the day settling back in, checking on everything, making sure their home was exactly as they'd left it. That night, sitting on the porch watching the sunset over familiar hills, Lucy asked a question that had clearly been percolating. Pa, what do you think will happen to those men in prison? Do you think they'll change, become better? Elias considered this carefully. I don't know. Some people change, some don't. I hope they do for their sakes. But that's not our responsibility anymore. We did what we needed to do. We told the truth. We sought justice. What they do with their second chance, if they even get one, is on them. Mama used to say everyone deserves a second chance, but I think some people waste them. Your mama was wise, and so are you. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders. You know what I think? I think we both got our second chances. Mine came the day I found you on that road. Yours came when you chose to trust me instead of giving up, and we haven't wasted them. We've built something real here. Lucy leaned into him, comfortable and safe. I love our life, Pa. I love that it's just us, quiet and simple. I never want anything to change. Things will change, Elias said gently. You'll grow up, make your own choices. But the foundation we've built, that won't change. You'll always be my daughter, and I'll always be your father. That's permanent, Lucy. No matter what else happens, we've got that. She was quiet for a long moment, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. Then, so softly he almost missed it, she said, Thank you for stopping that day. Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for giving me a reason to stop, Elias replied, for giving me a reason to start living again. They sat together as night fell complete. Two people who'd found each other in the midst of loss and built something stronger than either had thought possible. The future remained uncertain, as futures always are. But whatever came next, they would face it together, father and daughter, family by choice, bound by something deeper and more lasting than blood. And that, Elias thought as Lucy's breathing evened into sleep against his shoulder, was more than enough. It was everything. Summer arrived with the kind of heat that made even the hardiest ranchers seek shade during midday hours. Lucy was 10 now, taller by another 3 inches, her face losing its last traces of childhood roundness. She worked alongside Elias with the easy competence of someone who'd been doing it her whole life, though in truth, it had only been a year and a half since that dusty road, that moment of choice that had changed everything. The morning started like any other. Chores completed before the worst heat, breakfast eaten in comfortable silence, plans made for the afternoon work. But as Elias was checking the water pump, he saw Lucy standing at the fence line, staring out toward the eastern ridge with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Something wrong?" he called. She turned, and he saw tears on her cheeks. Not the frightened tears of a child in danger, but something deeper, more complicated. "It's been a year today," she said quietly, "since Mama and Papa died." Elias felt his chest tighten. He'd known the anniversary was approaching, but hadn't realized it had arrived. He crossed to her, leaned against the fence beside her. "You've been thinking about them." "All morning. I woke up and it just hit me. They've been gone a whole year. And I'm happy, Pa. I'm so happy here with you, but that makes me feel guilty, like I'm betraying their memory by moving on." He was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Lucy, your parents loved you. That's the one thing that's absolutely certain. And people who love someone want them to be happy, to thrive, to have a good life. You being happy here doesn't dishonor them. If anything, it proves they raised you well enough that you could survive their loss and still find joy. But I barely think about them anymore. Some days I don't think about them at all. What kind of daughter does that make me? A living one. A healthy one." He put his arm around her shoulders. "Grief isn't meant to last forever, Lucy. It's meant to be felt, honored, and then gradually integrated into who you are. Your parents are part of you, in the way you work, the values you hold, the kindness you show. You carry them forward every day. You don't need to be sad to remember them." She leaned into him, this girl who'd become his daughter in every way that mattered. "I want to do something to honor them, to make sure they're not forgotten." "What did you have in mind? Could we plant something? A tree, maybe? Something that will grow and last? Something beautiful that marks their memory?" Elias felt emotion well up, threatening to overflow. "That's a fine idea. A real fine idea. We'll ride into town this afternoon, get a proper sapling, oak maybe, or cottonwood, something that'll still be standing long after we're both gone." They made the journey to Sweetwater in the afternoon, the heat oppressive but bearable. The town had grown in the past year, 2 new buildings on the main street, more people on the boardwalks. Progress, Elias supposed, though he wasn't sure he entirely approved. At the general store, Martha Brennan greeted them with her usual warmth. "Elias, Lucy, what brings you in on a weekday?" "Looking for a tree sapling," Lucy explained. "Something strong and long-lasting." Martha's expression softened with understanding. "For your parents?" Lucy nodded, and Martha disappeared into the back, returning with a young cottonwood carefully wrapped in burlap. "This one's been waiting for the right home. No charge. Consider it a gift." "Martha, we can't," Elias started, but she waved him off. "You can, and you will. That girl's been through enough. Let an old woman do something kind without arguing." As they were loading the tree into the wagon, Emma came running up, her face flushed with excitement. "Lucy, I was hoping I'd see you. There's a social next week for the 4th of July. Will you come? There'll be games and music and fireworks." Lucy glanced at Elias, question in her eyes. He nodded. "If you want to go, we'll go." "I want to," Lucy said, then added quickly, "If you don't mind, Pa." "I don't mind. Might be nice to see some fireworks." On the ride home, Lucy was quieter than usual, thoughtful in a way that suggested she was working through something complicated. Finally, as the ranch came into view, she spoke. "Pa, do you think there will ever come a day when I don't feel torn between 2 families? When I can love you without feeling like I'm being disloyal to Mama and Papa Harper?" "I don't think you're torn between families, Lucy. I think you're carrying both of them with you. That's not the same thing as being divided. You're just bigger than you used to be, big enough to hold all that love and all that loss at the same time." She considered this, then nodded slowly. "I like that. Being bigger on the inside." They planted the cottonwood the next morning in a spot with good sun and access to water, where it would be visible from the house. Lucy worked with quiet intensity, getting the depth right, packing the soil carefully, watering it thoroughly. When they finished, she stood looking at the slender tree for a long moment. "Do you think they know?" she asked. "Wherever they are, do you think they know I'm all right?" "I think love doesn't end just because life does," Elias said. "I think they know." And I think they're glad you found a safe place to land. Lucy walked to him and wrapped her arms around his waist, hugging him tight. I'm glad too. I'm glad it was you who stopped that day. The week leading up to the 4th of July social passed in the usual rhythms of ranch work, but with an undercurrent of anticipation. Lucy practiced her reading with renewed vigor, knowing Emma would ask about it. She helped Elias bake pies for the event, apple this time, and only one collapsed, which they considered a victory. The social was held in a meadow just outside town, with tables set up under shade trees and a small stage for musicians. When Elias and Lucy arrived, the celebration was already in full swing, children running in chaotic games, adults clustered in conversation groups, the smell of roasting meat heavy in the air. Lucy was immediately swept up by Emma and several other children, her laughter ringing clear as they ran off to play. Elias found himself standing alone, slightly uncomfortable in the crowd, until Sheriff Brennan appeared with 2 glasses of lemonade. Quite a change from the man who used to come to town once every 3 months and speak to no one, Brennan observed. That man didn't have a daughter who wanted to socialize, Elias replied, but there was warmth in his voice. She's thriving, Elias. Everyone can see it. You've done well by her. She's done well by me. I'd have died out there eventually, maybe not physically, but in every way that matters. She gave me a reason to keep living. Brennan nodded, understanding in his eyes. That's what family does. Gives us reasons. They watched the children play for a while, Lucy's bright laugh distinguishing itself from the general chaos. Then Brennan spoke again, his tone more serious. I heard from Marshal Webb last week. Those drifters, Coulter and Jackson, they're at the territorial prison now, sentenced to 22 years each. They won't be bothering anyone for a long time. Elias felt tension he hadn't realized he was carrying finally release. Good. That's good. There's more. Apparently Coulter's been talking, trying to reduce his sentence. He gave up names of other gang members, locations of stolen goods. Webb thinks it might break up a whole network of thieves operating through the territory. So something good came from all of it. More than you know. Your willingness to stand up, to testify. It encouraged others. 3 more families have come forward with complaints. People who were too scared before, who thought nothing would come of reporting. You changed that. Elias didn't know what to say to that. He'd never thought of their actions as having ripples beyond their own immediate safety. But he supposed courage was like that, contagious, spreading in ways you couldn't predict. The afternoon wore on in pleasant fashion. Lucy won a 3-legged race with Emma, came in second in a pie-eating contest, and generally threw herself into the festivities with the enthusiasm of a child who finally felt secure enough to simply be a child. Watching her, Elias felt something shift in his chest. Not quite peace, but close to it. A sense that they'd weathered the worst and come through intact. As evening fell and people began gathering for the fireworks, Reverend Morrison approached with a gentle smile. Mr. Crow, might I have a word? They stepped away from the crowd, and the Reverend's expression turned thoughtful. I've been watching you and Lucy this past year and a half. The transformation in both of you is remarkable. I wonder if you've given any thought to making your bond official in the eyes of the church. Elias frowned, confused. The adoption's legal. What more needs to be done? I'm thinking of something more symbolic. A blessing ceremony, perhaps. A public acknowledgement before the community that you've chosen each other as family. Some families find it meaningful, a way to mark the commitment they've made. Lucy's already my daughter. I don't need a ceremony to make that more real. Of course not. But sometimes rituals serve a purpose beyond just legal recognition. They give communities a chance to witness and support. They give children a memory to hold on to, a moment when the world affirmed their belonging. Elias was quiet, thinking. Then he called Lucy over, explained what the Reverend was suggesting. What do you think? He asked her. Would you want something like that? Lucy looked between them, her expression serious. Would it be like a wedding, but for families instead of married people? Something like that, Morrison said. A commitment ceremony. You'd stand before the community and declare your choice to be father and daughter, and they'd witness it, support it. Lucy's eyes went bright. I'd like that. I'd like everyone to know that you're my pa and I'm your daughter, not because we had to be, but because we chose to be. And so it was arranged. The ceremony would be simple, held after church the following Sunday, open to anyone who wished to attend. Reverend Morrison assured them it would be brief, focused, nothing overly elaborate. The week leading up to it passed in a strange mixture of anticipation and nervousness. Lucy fretted over what to wear, finally settling on her best blue dress. Elias cleaned his only good suit, tried to tame his hair into some semblance of order, and wondered what exactly he was supposed to say when the moment came. Sunday arrived clear and warm, the kind of perfect summer day that felt like a blessing in itself. The church was more crowded than usual, word having spread about the ceremony. Elias recognized faces from town, neighboring ranchers, even Marshall Webb, who'd made the trip from Cheyenne specifically for this. Lucy stood beside him at the front of the church, her hand in his, both of them facing Reverend Morrison. The Reverend's voice was gentle, but carried clearly through the space. We are gathered today to witness and celebrate a family formed not by accident of birth, but by deliberate choice. Elias Crow and Lucy Harper. Crow have chosen each other as father and daughter. They have weathered hardship together, defended each other, built a home and a life together. Today they stand before this community to declare that choice publicly and to seek your blessing and support. He turned to Elias. Elias, do you take this child as your daughter, to raise and protect, to guide and cherish for all the days of your life? Elias's voice was steady, certain. I do. I choose her freely and gladly, and I promise to be the father she deserves for as long as I draw breath. Morrison turned to Lucy. Lucy, do you take this man as your father, to honor and trust, to learn from and love for all the days of your life? Lucy's voice rang clear despite her small size. I do. I choose him freely and gladly, and I promise to be the daughter who makes him proud. Then by the power vested in me and witnessed by this community, I declare you bound as father and daughter, family in the eyes of both law and love. What you have chosen, let no one tear asunder. The church erupted in applause. Lucy threw her arms around Elias, and he held her tight, feeling tears he didn't bother to hide. When they finally separated, the entire congregation was standing, applauding, bearing witness to the family they'd become. Afterward, there was cake and celebration, people offering congratulations and well wishes. Martha Brennan cried openly, hugging them both. Sheriff Brennan shook Elias's hand with a grip that conveyed more than words. Even crusty old ranchers who'd initially been skeptical approached to offer gruff approval. But the moment that mattered most came later, as they were driving home in the wagon, the sun setting behind them in shades of gold and crimson. Lucy sat close beside him, leaning against his shoulder with comfortable familiarity. Pa? She said quietly. Yeah? Thank you for today, for making it official in front of everyone, for showing the whole world that we're a family. You don't need to thank me, Lucy. You're my daughter. That's just the truth. I know, but I wanted to say it anyway. She was quiet for a moment, then added, I used to be so scared of forgetting Mama and Papa Harper, but I realize now that I don't have to choose between remembering them and loving you. I can do both. They gave me life and raised me with love. You gave me a second chance and a new life. I'm so lucky to have had both families. Elias felt his throat tighten with emotion. They'd be proud of you, Lucy. The way you've handled loss, the strength you've shown, the person you're becoming. They'd be so damn proud. Do you think Sarah and your son would be proud too, of you taking me in? I think Sarah would tell me it took me too damn long to start living again. And I think my son would be glad his room got used, his things got loved. They'd approve, Lucy. I'm certain of that. They rode in silence for a while, watching the familiar landscape roll past. The cottonwood they'd planted for Lucy's parents was visible from the road now, its leaves rustling in the evening breeze. The ranch appeared ahead, small but sturdy, a testimony to what they'd built together. You know what I realized today? Lucy said, during the ceremony. What's that? I realized that family isn't about who you're born to. It's about who chooses to stay, who shows up day after day, who teaches you and protects you and makes you feel like you matter. That's what makes someone family. That's wisdom beyond your years talking. Maybe. Or maybe it's just the truth everyone knows but doesn't always say out loud. She straightened up, looking at him directly. You chose to stop that day on the road. You chose to give me a home. You chose to fight for me, to testify for me, to stand with me. And I choose you right back, Pa. Every single day, I choose you. Elias had to look away, blinking hard. I choose you too, Lucy. Always. As they pulled into the ranch yard, the last light fading from the sky, Elias felt a sense of completeness he'd never expected to feel again. The loneliness that had defined him for 6 years was gone, replaced by connection, purpose, love. He had a daughter who made him laugh, who challenged him to be better, who filled the house with light and life. They unhitched the wagon together, working in the easy synchronization of long practice. Fed the animals, checked the water, secured everything for the night. Simple tasks, but infused with meaning by their shared commitment to the life they'd built. Later, sitting on the porch watching stars emerge, Lucy asked one more question. Pa, what do you think happens next? For us, I mean. What's our future look like? Elias considered this carefully. I think you keep growing, learning, becoming the person you're meant to be. I think we keep working this ranch together for as long as we're able. I think we face whatever challenges come our way the same way we faced everything else. Together. And when I'm grown, when I'm old enough to make my own choices, then you make them. If you want to stay and run this place, it's yours. If you want to see the world, try something different. I'll support that too. Whatever you choose, Lucy, you'll always have a home here, always have a father who loves you. She nodded, satisfied with this answer. They sat in comfortable silence until the cold drove them inside. Elias banked the fire while Lucy prepared for bed, the domestic routines as familiar now as breathing. Good night, Pa, she called from her room. Good night, Lucy. Love you. Love you too. Elias sat at the table for a long time after she'd gone to sleep, a cup of coffee growing cold in his hands. He thought about the man he'd been 18 months ago, bitter, isolated, convinced his life was over in any meaningful sense. That man would be shocked to see him now, transformed by the simple act of stopping for a child in need. But transformation, he'd learned, wasn't really that simple. It required courage to risk caring again. It required strength to choose connection over safety. It required faith that the possibility of loss didn't negate the value of love. Lucy had taught him all of that. This small, fierce, brilliant girl who'd looked at him with trust when she had no reason to trust anyone, who'd stood beside him against danger, who'd chosen him as her father just as certainly as he'd chosen her as his daughter. He stood and walked quietly to her room, stood in the doorway watching her sleep. She'd kicked off her blanket, as usual. He covered her gently, his hand lingering for a moment on her shoulder. Thank you, he whispered, too quiet to wake her, for giving me back my life. The months that followed settled into peaceful routine. Lucy started school full-time in the fall, riding into town 3 days a week to attend classes with Emma and the other children. She thrived academically, her quick mind devouring books, her essays earning praise from Miss Hayes. But she never lost her connection to the ranch, spending her free days working alongside Elias with undiminished enthusiasm. By the time her 11th birthday arrived in March, she'd grown tall enough to look Elias almost directly in the eye. They celebrated quietly, just the two of them, with cake and a few simple gifts. But the best present, Lucy declared, was the horse Elias had been training for her, a gentle mare with intelligent eyes and a patient temperament. She's perfect, Lucy said, running her hands over the horse's neck. What's her name? That's for you to decide. She's yours. Lucy thought for a moment, then smiled. Sarah. I'll name her Sarah after your wife. So there's always a Sarah on this ranch. Elias felt his eyes burn with tears he didn't bother to hide anymore. She'd be honored. And so am I. Spring brought new life to the ranch. Calves born healthy, crops planted with Lucy's eager help, the cottonwood putting out new growth that promised it would indeed become the strong tree they'd envisioned. Summer followed with its familiar patterns of work and heat and occasional visits to town for socials and supplies. It was during one of these visits, in late July, that Lucy and Elias encountered a scene that brought their journey full circle. A wagon stood at the edge of town, clearly broken down, a woman and 2 young children sitting in its shade looking lost and frightened. Lucy saw them first. Pa, look! They need help! Elias pulled the wagon to a stop, and they both climbed down. The woman looked up with wary hope as they approached. Afternoon, Elias said gently. Looks like you're having some trouble. Axle broke, the woman said, her voice thick with exhaustion. My husband went ahead to the next town to find work, said he'd send for us. But that was 3 weeks ago, and we haven't heard anything. I don't know what to do." Lucy was already crouching beside the children, offering them water from her canteen, speaking to them in the kind, patient voice she'd learned from Elias. He watched her for a moment, saw himself 18 months ago reflected in her actions, and felt pride swell in his chest. "Let's get you into town," he said to the woman. "Sheriff can help you contact your husband, and we'll get that wagon fixed." "How long since you've eaten?" "Yesterday morning." Elias and Lucy exchanged a look, an entire conversation passing between them without words. Then Lucy spoke up. "Pa and I have a ranch about 15 miles north. It's not fancy, but there's room. You and your children could stay with us while you get things sorted out, if you want." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "We couldn't impose—" "It's not an imposition," Elias said firmly. "It's what people do. They help each other when help is needed." As they loaded the family into their wagon and headed into town to make arrangements, Lucy sat beside Elias with a small, knowing smile. "What?" he asked. "Nothing, just thinking about circles, how things come around." "You offering our home to strangers now? I seem to remember a scared little girl who needed someone to make that offer for her." "That's exactly what I'm remembering," Lucy said, "and thinking that maybe the best way to honor what you did for me is to do the same for someone else. You taught me that, Pa. You taught me that stopping to help isn't weakness or foolishness. It's what makes us human." Elias reached over and squeezed her hand. "You're going to be a remarkable woman, Lucy Crow. You already are." "I learned from the best." They helped the woman, her name was Rebecca, contact her husband, who turned out to be in Rock Springs, genuinely trying to earn enough to send for his family but delayed by circumstances beyond his control. While they waited for him to make the journey back, Rebecca and her children stayed at the ranch, the house filling with noise and laughter and the particular chaos of young children. Lucy took to the role of older sister with enthusiasm, teaching the children to gather eggs, to identify bird calls, to navigate the ranch safely. Elias watched her patience with them, her kindness, and saw the person she'd become, strong, compassionate, capable of both fierce protection and gentle nurturing. When Rebecca's husband finally arrived and they prepared to leave, continuing their journey to a new start, Rebecca pulled Lucy aside. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You and your father saved us. I won't forget that." "Just remember to help someone else when you can," Lucy said. "That's all the thanks we need." After they'd gone, Elias and Lucy stood in the yard, the house feeling empty again, but in a good way. "You did well with those children," Elias said. "They reminded me of me, scared, uncertain, not knowing if things would work out. I wanted them to know kindness exists. Because someone showed it to you." "Because you showed it to me," Lucy corrected. "Everything good I know about being strong and kind at the same time, I learned from watching you." Elias pulled her into a hug, this daughter who'd become the center of his world. "We learned it together, I think. I didn't know how to be kind anymore until you gave me a reason." As the sun set that evening, they sat on the porch, as they had hundreds of times before, watching the light fade and the stars emerge. The cottonwood Lucy had planted for her first parents rustled in the breeze, grown tall and strong. The ranch spread around them, the land they'd fought for and claimed through work and dedication. "Pa?" Lucy said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Yeah? I'm happy. Right now, in this moment, I'm completely happy. And I wanted you to know that." Elias felt his throat tighten. "I'm happy too, Lucy. Happier than I ever thought I'd be again." "Good." She leaned against him, this girl who'd saved him as surely as he'd saved her. "Because this is what I want to remember when I'm old. Not the hard parts, not the fear or the danger. Just this. Us, together, watching the stars. Just this perfect, ordinary happiness." "Then that's what we'll remember," Elias promised. "Both of us. Together." And as darkness fell complete, two people who'd found each other on a dusty road sat side by side, bound by choice and love and the simple, powerful decision to keep choosing each other, day after day, year after year, for all the years to come. They'd both been broken once, shattered by loss and loneliness, but they'd found each other in the wreckage and built something stronger than either had been alone. A family, a home, a future worth fighting for, and that, they both knew, was more than enough. It was everything.